Welcome, one and all, to the Stock Up Podcast, your one-stop shop for stocking up on the information you need to qualify for the Pro Tour. My name is Alex Midas. I am joined each and every week by my co-host, Jacob Negro, where we talk about everything related to competitive Magic and how you can qualify for the Pro Tour. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do so is over on patreon.com/stockuppodcast. At the moment, we have one tier that's $1 a month, and for that, you get access to all of our exclusive content. For all of our patrons who have supported us thus far, on behalf of Jacob and I would like to thank you very much. And if you'd like to follow us also over on YouTube, that would be much appreciated. Of course, you can also listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thanks for listening, and please enjoy the rest of the podcast. So, Jacob, for the first time in a long time, I think I might be interested in building a paper modern deck.
Nice. Yeah, the RCQ season is starting in April.
Yeah, it's something to compete for. I'm hoping I can build it, and it will be something that kind of lasts for a while that I can play with. There's some local people who like modern, so that could be cool. I mean, I'll tell you what, the prices of these decks are a little scary, so I'm trying to pick carefully which one I want to build.
Yeah, definitely. I'm keeping in mind that I might have time to play, an RCQ or two. And I've been thinking a little bit as well about what modern deck I might play. I don't own that many things. I own, Brood Scale. I own a lot of the Eldrazi and stuff and most of the Amulet deck. I could probably borrow, if I'm missing a few things, I could probably find someone to lend them to me.
One thing that's tough is there's not a ton of overlap between the decks. There's some staples with fetch lands and some of the artifacts and whatnot.
Yeah.
A lot of cards a lot of decks have their own really expensive cards.
Yeah. I mean, I guess also I'm in a fortunate position. I own pretty much all the shocks and fetches. And
yeah, it's pretty good.
Surveil lands, so I can at least start that. But I guess Boros Energy is another deck I'm actually pretty interested in. Maybe just playing for the RCQs, which we'll get into in a minute. But
yeah,
I own all 23 lands I want to play in that deck, but no MH3 spells.
That makes it a lot easier. Although obviously some of those MH3 spells are really expensive.
Yeah.
I similarly have a lot of fetch lands and shock lands and some of the Quantum Riddlers and stuff. So I'm kind of leaning towards Jeskai Blink. So I'll be kind of curious to hear what you say about that deck. Today we're doing a modern tier list. So that's going to be fun. You can follow along on video, but also we're going to make it audio friendly as well. This is not so much going to be a modern overview, because Modern hasn't changed a ton since we've done our last videos, so you can go check out our old Modern videos. They're still pretty relevant. But we're going to be going over all the decks, talking about some of the new cards I've gotten and that sort of thing, going into the RCQ season.
Yeah, and for reference, when I was deciding what decks I wanted to talk about in this tier list, because obviously there's basically infinite Modern decks, we got 19 here that are mostly, probably the top 16-ish you'll see on Goldfish right now, and then a few more I just wanted to talk about that I thought were maybe good, good enough to add to a tier list at the very least. And then since the last one, I noticed we had 16 decks, and I believe there was only 2 of them on that list that I didn't include on this one, so some things have fallen out of favor. I don't know exactly how to identify that. I guess the Grixis Persist deck is an example of a deck that I'm not planning on talking about today, because it just doesn't seem like it sees any play at all, really. At least, among popular Modern decks, I'm sure you'll still encounter it every now and then, and I'm sure there's people listening that still play it.
Yeah, and before we had a blue-white Starfield Shepherd Blink deck, but I think that's mostly been cannibalized by the Jeskai deck.
Yep.
So
I guess those were the 2 that are gone now. And yeah, if you're wondering why they're missing, well, there you go.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, well, is there any deck in particular you want to start with? I guess we could just start with Boros Energy. I mean, it's still sort of the biggest deck right now.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to talk about Boros because it's maybe more popular than it has been in a while. I know it's weird to say for a deck that's always, the most popular, but it seems like its metagame share has just been growing and growing.
MTG Goldfish has it at 20% for the last 30 days.
Yeah. Um, and, I've probably said this before, and I still feel this way. I think Boros is, a pretty reasonable deck. I don't think it's like a deck I'd consider bad. I think it's fast enough and can play the right disruption. And it makes sense to me to be the most popular deck because I think that it's, never going to be that bad in any given matchup. I think it's kind of Jundy like that, where its matchup spread is pretty close to even across the board with a few outliers and maybe more, I think, in the negative direction, but some in the positive direction as well. And then, I think any deck that's going to be the most played deck in Modern for a long time, I would probably not say is the best choice for a tournament. But if there was ever a time where maybe that wasn't true, it seems like Boros is just continuing to do pretty good. And I think if I had to give a reason for that, I'd say it's because, it's just Magic Online and things aren't shifting around that much. And it just happens to, still be well positioned and people aren't changing things. I think matchups like maybe Affinity and Jeskai Blink are both good for Boros, and those are also really popular decks right now. So that might be a big reason why. So I guess if I had to put it on the tier list, I guess probably be top of B, bottom of A is what I'm thinking, where I don't think it's like completely broken, but I do actually think it's pretty well positioned right now.
Makes sense. Are there any like new cards? Any innovations lately? Like I see a list that has some
I really liked Twinless
season
Twin.
Pyromancers.
I think you sent me that list. One, I actually don't even know what step I know it was Mox qualification related. I don't know if it was the actual big tournament that qualified them for the Mox, or if it was the thing you just needed the top 8 to then play another tournament. Twinless Twin is also Max. I'm gonna look up his last name. He's someone I've talked to and played against a lot, but I just want to make sure I get it right. Max has been kind of dominating these paper events and even online events with lessons recently. He top 8'd a showcase and an RC, I want to say. Maybe it wasn't 2 showcases. And I think in a third event, like lost a win in.
Okay.
So definitely doing quite well. And that's all with lessons, to be fair. But then, also won this event with Boros, and also, I believe, qualified for an arena championship with lessons. So kind of just dominating with lessons right now. But pretty cool to see them playing Boros. And he had a Dalkovian encampment from Dragonstorm Tarkir, or Tarkir Dragonstorm, which is pretty cool. This deck innovated Voice of Victory from that set, basically as soon as it came out. And the encampment does, basically gives one of your creatures mobilized 2. It's worded a little bit differently than that, but that's effectively what it is. But, the extra tokens in your bombardment deck were, it's worded, they stay till the end step, I believe, unless it's somehow different.
Yeah, I'm looking at the card right now.
Okay.
It's 2 and a white, tap whenever you attack this turn, create 2 1/1 red warrior creature tokens, sack with the next end step. Yeah, so they stick around.
So that can pretty easily, you'd have 4 mana plus activating this. You could get, City's Blessing for Ocelot Pride and keep the tokens. The tokens are red for a Ajani post-combat or something like that too. Makes sense to squeeze in on the mana base. I think, I've worked on Boros Energy for over a year now, off and on in Modern, and I think that you can afford like 1 lands like this, and, there's just been times where I thought, like, for example, a Gonjo, the channel land, could maybe have been good in Boros, but then I just thought it was worse than another fetch land because the fetch land's so flexible. But this is a land I could see actually kind of competing in that slot and being worth it because, the deck's kind of about board presence and damage, and this is a land that actually gives you that, and you still get to play it as a land.
Yeah. It can maybe help you get up to your City's Blessing.
Yeah, also Guide of Souls is like an attack trigger as well. And it doesn't care how much energy you have when it goes on the stack every time you attack. So if you use the encampment, you can stack the getting 2 1/1s on top of Guide of Souls and get 2 energy, which might get you to that 3 energy breakpoint.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
And then you can use it.
This list I'm looking at that's adapted the Dalkovan encampment also has some Ranger, Captain of Eos, and some Season Pyromancers. Is that
Season Pyromancer is kind of the stock thing? Yeah.
Okay.
I like just kind of starting with 4, but maybe you could adjust it based on the meta. to do various other things, but I don't mind seeing Ranger Captain. Its biggest flaw is it's not red. And I think these flex spots being red permanents for a Ajani can be a pretty big deal. But there's obviously some decks where that sacrifice text is kind of a nightmare. It also helps you assemble Guide plus Pride a little bit more often, so it's a card that totally makes sense in the 3-drop slot. I don't think you can play too many in this deck. There's already 4 Flage on top of that. But yeah, it seems like the Ranger Captains I noticed were pretty common in deck lists right now, so I don't know if there's something, a matchup people have in mind, or if they just kind of find that, the combo matchups are kind of scary. I mean, I suppose Ruby Storm is also very popular right now, so maybe that's just why.
Yeah, it seems like a decent card against Ruby Storm. And then the Legend of Roku seems pretty stock in the sideboard at this point.
Yeah, that's now pretty stock one. I think when you put that on your Avatar top 10, and I pointed it his replacing Showdown of the Skulls in this deck, and that's kind of exactly what happened. It's certainly a hard card to play multiple copies of, but it kind of does an effective job of, it's one less card than Showdown of the Skulls, but you get an actual threat that your opponent kind of has to answer.
Yeah, so that's cool. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, you don't have a ton of card drawing options.
Yeah.
In a red-white deck, so it makes sense. Okay, so where did you say you ended up with it? You said B tier?
We could put it at the top of B, and maybe as things fill out, we might move it to the bottom of A or whatever. I kind of think it would be in between those, around that.
All right, fair enough. Very much the Jund of Modern, huh? Yeah. Okay, which one do you want to tackle next?
I guess we can get into Ruby Storm next, or yeah, sure. Ruby Storm, even that's a little out of order. I just had guessed the second. I'm really not a big fan of this deck. It's pretty surprising to me that it's staying so popular online for so long. I'm sure this deck should deservedly have its tournaments that it can take down. It's very fast and consistent, but it's like a huge example of a deck to me that is really vulnerable to the format kind of attacking it and being ready for it. And I think even at the breakout MH3 PT that was demonstrated, where this deck was like the second most played deck in the room after Nadu and had like a 35% win rate, despite, I think maybe being favored against Nadu just slightly. But that's kind of what my internal testing led me to believe, and I'm guessing why so many people registered it for that tournament. Because that's just a pure race, which, kind of indicates this deck is quite fast if it's outracing Nadu.
I wonder why it's had a resurgence. Maybe it's the price since it's played on Magical Land a lot.
This is also a deck I just happen to own, basically, because it is very cheap. I just made sure to buy the Rowls and Ruby Medallions when it came out, and I already had the old Storm deck. From there, yeah, I mean it's pretty cool. I think, the Surveil lands are also pretty uniquely important to this deck because it doesn't play any 1-drops, and you might be used to the Storm decks of the past playing 1-mana cantrips, and this deck just tries to fetch a Surveil land on turn 1 every single game. But yeah, I think, I see more Trinispheres, Amulet sideboards currently have Trinisphere right now, because this is kind of a bad matchup for them. But I think, I could imagine the Amulet with 4 Trinisphere in the sideboard is just favored against Ruby Storm. It's way too high impact of a thing, and they're dedicating so many slots to beating it, and that's kind of exactly what I mean by just what the format can kind of change to do. It just warps itself around decks being popular like this. And weirdly, in Modern, I think decks that maybe are known to have very bad matchups can find things to really flip them. And you get into these weird spots where a deck like Ruby Storm you'd prefer to play against, like a Temur deck that plays a bunch of counter magic and disruption, but not any dedicated hate, then you'd prefer to play against Amulet that just has a bunch of hate.
Okay, that's interesting, because a lot of the times with these combo decks, they tend to have more polarizing matchup spreads, but honestly, this one is, there's so many good angles of attack against it that I would think maybe it might just have trouble against anyone who's prepared.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it takes dedicated hate. I think the kind of redundancy of the deck, it basically has 8 copies of all of its cards. I think that redundancy does make it pretty good against counter magic and discard. I don't think those things are, the scariest thing for this deck to deal with. They're kind of just going to rebuild and draw the right cards. But I do think that, just fighting through Trinisphere or High Noon or things like that is much more of a pain.
Gotcha. So definitely as this deck becomes more popular, it almost becomes a worse choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Um, in terms of our tier list,
Yeah, I guess I don't want to put it at F, I guess, but it's close. We could put it in C for now and move things above it in C as they get added, I'd say.
so like our D tier below Johnny, or
Yeah, below,
gotcha.
yeah, in the C tier for sure. I think it's kind of a pretty. I think it's just about to be a poorly positioned deck if it's not already reached that. I think that's kind of how Storm is, I guess, is how I would say. I think it had a resurgence because I think people were really into Amulet, and Amulet was getting really popular, and that's a time where it makes sense to play Ruby Storm.
Mm,
But now Amulet's not even that popular, and every list I see of Amulet right now is like 3 Trinisphere in the sideboard.
rough, gotcha. Okay, well, another really popular deck is Jeskai Blink.
Yeah, perfect. You wanted to play that?
Yeah, which it's funny. It doesn't have a ton of unique cards in it, so I've represented it with Ragavan here.
Yeah, we talked about that before. There's no card in this deck really that is unique to it. It's just a pile of good cards,
Yeah.
and honestly, that's kind of maybe where I'd rank it. Honestly, where you've put it is already kind of good. Where I kind of think it's like a perfect kind of average,
Mm.
in the format. I don't think it's too strong. I don't think it's too bad. It's just
So how
kind of right down the middle.
how does it compare to Boros? I mean, is it like really just have similar matchup spreads? It is just a mid range deck, but it's doing something pretty different, right?
Yeah, I guess my thoughts on that deck is that it has all these little mini combos, but also a pretty decent amount of reactive things going on. It probably needs things like Solitude to be, better positioned in the matchups or things like that to be very good compared to Boros. And these combos can go fast, but it's also not that hard for your opponent to like interact with the combos. You can do the Arena of Glory Flage consign thing, but get your consign force negationed if you're doing that turn 4 or things like that. Or it's not like completely impervious to its opponent's interaction. This deck actually just reminds me a lot of how the Goryo's Vengeance deck plays, but instead of assembling Goryos plus Atraxa, you still want to assemble combos, but you can assemble them in a lot of different ways. And if you don't assemble a combo, it's not as disastrous because your cards all still do something instead of being like total blanks like Goryos and Atraxa. But at the same time, when you do assemble your combos, they're not as powerful as the turn 3 Goryos, Atraxa, and Ephemerate type of gameplay that you could have.
Yeah, so your combos are like Ephemerate Riddler, Ephemerate Solitude, or use Felia plus what consign to nuke things.
Yeah. Yeah, Consign works with Philia, Flage, and Riddler, and even Evoke Solitude.
Hmm.
Ephemerate works with 2 of those things, and then beyond that, it's just kind of an interaction deck, a lot of removal to clear the path for Ragavan. I think it's weird that 4 Ragavan isn't an absolutely must-have stock thing in these lists. I see 3 fairly often. I even remember back. I guess our last modern update was probably before I played the RC with Amulet. But over the course of the weekend, where I played Amulet and then Boros in the RCQ the next day, I played against 2 of these types of decks that just had I feel like 0 Ragavan and 3 Failure or something, and it just felt embarrassing to me. Like they just couldn't get on the board ever. And this deck doesn't even do that with consistency with only like 8 little cheap guys, but 8 is I feel like a minimum.
I mean, what else are you even doing on turn 1? You can kill a creature maybe if they play
Yeah.
one. That's about it.
Yeah, I've noticed Strict Serenade's been getting a bit more popular in this deck, and we talked about that, but that makes sense to me in specifically this deck because you can use Flage and Philia to get rid of the 2/2 birds, but also that's not entirely free. You could maybe, if you're against a creature deck, then that Strict Serenade give them the 2/2, and then you maybe have to kill another creature with Flage, and also using Philia on your opponent's thing when your whole deck is kind of built around being really good when you get to affiliate trigger also is a little bit fake to me, I guess. You can just affiliate something good in your deck instead.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't want a lot of them, but maybe you could wrath it away, bounce it with Teferi. Maybe you use it against a deck where your small creature removal
Yeah,
isn't good. You could kill something.
I mean, in general, Strict Serenade has been seeing more play than the basically 0 play it used to see, and I think that's pretty correlated with Quantum Riddler existing because there's just not a 1 mana counterspell besides Strict Serenade and Mystical Dispute are basically the only 2 that can counter Warped Riddler for 1 mana.
Right. So it's
So,
one blue instant counter artifact creature or planeswalker. Is that right?
yep,
Okay.
yep. Yeah, so I think really Quantum Riddler is the card that has made that card suddenly become playable in Modern, and in small numbers for sure. I don't want to just put a bunch in my deck. But, even the PT winning Belcher list played one of this in their main deck, which is really surprising because Belcher's life total is extremely important to themselves. So giving your opponent a 2/2 bird is, worth a lot of damage for them.
Hmm. It's interesting. It probably shows my lack of understanding how the game's play out in Modern, but this deck looks like it doesn't have enough interaction to be worth playing it over Boros, which is probably kills your opponent a lot faster. I guess most of its interaction is just relying on like creature and permanent removal, so it doesn't have very much stack interaction.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised there's not more in the sideboard. I don't mind seeing No More Lies. Also, yeah, on mana-based discussions, I'm pretty surprised to see islands whenever I see it in this deck. I would think, that's just going to get in the way of your Flage too much. But at the same time, I also know people like Blood Moon against this deck, so that makes sense.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, you definitely bring in more cyber blue cards. You definitely build the deck heavier blue and play with subtlety. That's a pretty nice card.
Yeah, and I talked about, I think in the Cube episode, I had my little mini rants about the Evoke Elementals and people caring a little bit too much about how much your pitch count is, and I just think you could probably just put one subtlety in this deck without really even counting your blue count. Like,
Yeah,
whatever.
because you can always
Sometimes you'll
just
count
cast
it.
it.
Yeah, sometimes you'll just cast it.
Yeah, I also like playing a lot of pitch cards with Quantum Riddler. That's pretty
Yeah,
nice.
in this deck, I think also for the kind of mini combo thing I'm talking about, especially once you know the matchup, you might want to mulligan somewhat aggressively, not just keep a hand that has the wrong interaction in the matchup or things like that, for sure.
That makes sense to me. So, with the head-to-head to Boros, which would you rather
I'd pick
play?
Boros.
Okay, makes sense. And for my personal reasons, I have more of this deck than I do of Boros. Certainly, do you think it's a decent deck for
Yeah, I do.
local tournaments?
I
Yeah.
think it'll be totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a cool deck. Play some cool cards, play some good cards that you can use in other places too, so that's kind of nice. Um, okay, so those are our red-white mid-range decks pretty much. We could go on to
Yeah, those are basically the only two Flage decks, I think, on this list, which is kind of a big selling point to playing either of them, is Flage is certainly one of the more powerful cards in Modern.
Flage is popular. Yeah, it is really strong. It reminds me of Uro. It's different in a way, but it's pretty similar. And Uro got banned.
It's pretty interesting that Boros Energy is the premier kind of Flage deck, where it's like a deck that's also vulnerable to Flage.
Yeah,
in a way, but
yeah,
it makes sense. And the Surveil lands, I think, really they've existed before Flage, but they've really made it easy for these decks to just put Flage in their deck, and you don't really have to be filling your graveyard in any weird out of the normal way besides just casting spells at a normal rate.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll leave it there in our middle of the road B for balanced tier. And then we can move on to, what do you think? What about Eldrazi Tron? This is what this Urza's Tower represents.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm a little unsure where to put that. I'd say it's nothing exceptional to me either. I've played it a lot for the last PT, and nothing has really changed in those lists. I think, once again, it's a deck I'm pretty skeptical of when it's as popular as it is. And we could move to the Eldrazi Ramp decks next, but right after we finish talking about this one, I think we see a lot of Obsidian Charmaw right now, which is like the premier card people go to when this deck is popular. Even I think the Jeskai Blink and Boros decks are probably playing those pretty regularly, which is just the best card in the format against this deck, I think, when you just play such a heavily colorless mana base. Beyond that, my other issue with the deck is that I think it's normal to play 4 Karn, 4 Ugin, and I don't have any issues with that. But Karn is like an A plus card in half your matchups, and Ugin is an A plus card in the other half of your matchups, and there's not a lot of overlap in my experience. If your opponent is playing to the board with a lot of permanents, then you want Ugin, and if they're, playing to stack based combo type decks or not really playing small creatures, you really want Karn because he's kind of a prison card, whereas Ugin just kind of keeps your opponent from having non-land permanents to play the whole game. But they both, Karn, when you have enough mana, certainly is not dead against any deck, and you could do like the Karn Ensnaring Bridge thing, but I have found Karn to be pretty underwhelming against Boros as an example.
That makes sense.
I would not expect, to be winning games that much against Boros if you just kept drawing Karn as your main payoff as this deck.
Yeah, and it's not like you have library manipulation. You're just kind of hoping to draw the right threats or / answers, however you think of them.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like you can know the matchup, and this deck can mulligan somewhat aggressively. And like I said, on the other hand, I think if you turn 3 Ugins, your Boros opponent, you'd pretty much always win. So,
yeah. Just for the fun factor, I would say this was like another deck I was considering building. Again, it doesn't have very many overlap cards, but it's like a little bit cheaper than the other decks. So,
yeah, and there's some flexibility to this deck. I see you have a list with Mycospawn up, which that was a card I tried and I hated, to be honest. I would advise against doing that.
Okay.
I guess the other card to keep in mind as this deck gets popular is Voidmere, which I'm not sure if Voidmere is seeing a lot of play right now. But this deck can have a little bit of play against Voidmere. You can play Talismans over Mind Stones and kind of splash a color, plus have, maybe a few lands in your mana base, because you just need to have one colored mana to start casting your spells through Voidmere. But, I think sometimes there was a time where I saw wastes in this deck, which I thought was kind of unacceptable over a basic lands that you could, make a colored mana with. Or I've had this discussion with other people, and they told me you could sideboard waste because it is important against Blood Moon, because you can combo it with a Talisman to start casting K commands, which makes sense. Also, I'll just say, any of these decks with Eldrazi Temple, Cosmos Command is like the best card in your deck. It's really a reason why these decks are so strong. It's just super flexible. It's both a payoff to having tons of mana, but also kind of a bridge card. It's really common to cast it for X equals 2, which then just kind of bridges you to all the expensive stuff in your deck if you make the spawns.
Yeah, it is kind of the perfect card. They would never print this as a void card, basically.
Yeah.
It would just be so good. Yeah, so I mean, this deck looks like a ton of fun, and that's maybe why people play it a lot.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward to play. I don't think it's as poorly positioned right now as I would think of as Ruby Storm, but we could probably put it in that kind of tier to me.
Okay, so a little bit below average, not quite as bad as Ruby Storm. Okay, makes sense. Do you want to let's see, where's our other Eldrazi deck? Eldrazi Ramp.
Yeah.
So how does this deck compare?
It's probably also not as interesting to me. It's when the big man is being under attack, but I kind of think it's a little bit more resilient to that type of gameplay. It doesn't play as many colorless lands, so it's harder for your opponent to hit your stuff with Charmaw or cast Charmaw quickly. This is also a deck I wanted to talk about because it maybe got a new card. It's not certain that it should see play in it, but I've seen some lists with Formidable Speaker, which has some cool applications. First of all, in Modern, there's a few lands that tap for more than 1 mana. So the 1 mana untap target permanent mode on this card can actually go up a mana. Just 1 in this deck, but even Eldrazi Temple, if you're casting an Eldrazi, will work. There's Utopia Sprawl. I guess you can't put Utopia Sprawl in any of your soul lands, but if you have 2 Utopia Sprawls, I guess that would work too. But yeah, there's a few outs, and also Ugin's Lab. I would guess pretty reliably, if you untapped with the Formidable Speaker, you would be getting 1 mana out of it. And then from there, you have all these weird, powerful payoffs. You might want to play a mix of them. I know Ice-Till Explorer used to be kind of a staple part of this deck, but maybe you could just have, a few Ice-Tills, get an Ice-Till when you need it, instead of playing 4 to try to draw it regularly. Also, sometimes casting Kozilek's Turn kind of sucks in a matchup, but getting the trigger from it is really good. So a discard outlet is not totally unwelcome either. Also, I was thinking about, if in Harrogast, so kind of the joke with the Harrogast deck previously is that you cast it, you emerge off something, and then it gives all your spells a merge, but it costs 9. So if you have Emrakul and 4 or more types in your graveyard, you could just immediately Emrakul your opponent. So playing with Heragast is kind of like the way to make this deck fast, because especially if you're against a turn 3 combo deck like Ruby Storm or Amulet, as an example, they kind of just instantly lose to Emrakul. And in general, in Modern, I would say Emrakul is about as close to a game just reading you win the game, or a spell reading you win the game on it, as you can get. It's usually devastating enough. There's certainly exceptions, and the more kind of normal, I guess, your opponent's deck is, the less devastating it might be, especially if they like have Solitude to answer it right away. But for Speaker, you can tutor either Heragast or Emrakul with it, and then emerge off it, and then it also helped you discard a card along the way, so you might have the 4 types in your graveyard faster than you think. This is kind of an imaginary sequence, but you could fetch your Surveil land on turn 1, play Ugin's Lab on turn 2, play Formidable Speaker, and then on turn 3, you could get another red land, make 5 mana because you had Ugin's Lab, emerge this, and if you Surveilled and your fetch land and your Formidable Speaker and the card you discard the Speaker could be 4 card types.
Okay. And for those of you not following along, Heragast has this second ability where each creature spell you cast has a merge equal to its mana cost. So that's what he means by making the Emrakul really cheap. In addition to its, the Emrakul has the ability where it costs 1 less for your Delirium. What do you think about some of these other one of tutors?
Yeah, the boar is a little ridiculous to me. I would not include that.
What does this
it's already
card
hard
do?
enough to fit in
you attack and then you put in. Oh, I see.
I don't know if there's another card that can cheat on a Kozilek's Return that you could play as at least a one of, besides just Heragast, but that doesn't really cheat if they kill your Speaker. When I've played this deck, I really like playing Temur, not Heragast, and playing with 4 Null Drifter with Kozilek's Return. I really like that combo, and in fact, I even played that combo in Historic, though the returns were just in the sideboard. But still, it's kind of such a heavy hitter against a deck like Boros to have both a 3-mana Pyroclasm in your deck that you can play on turn 2 because you have a Utopia Sprawl and Ugin's Lab, but also to have just a Divination that flashes it back, and then obviously you can get to 7 mana and cast your 7 mana Eldrazi and do it. But
yeah, it's funny you say that because I played that Historic deck a bit, and I was surprised with how much I was just casting a Divination. You wouldn't think something like that would be remotely playable, but
well, Ugin's Labyrinth just asks you to play 7 mana colorless cards, and you want to put 10 or more in your deck, and it's hard to put, I just think, a regular 10 expensive cards like that in your deck and have its function still be reasonable compared to just putting 4 Null Drifter in your deck, which is kind of a fine ramp payoff anyways. It's not that weird to cast it for 7 on turn 3, but also if your opponent is disrupting you or the game's just not going that way, you can still cast Divination, and it's cheaper than Divination, with Eldrazi Temple in your deck. It's more like 2 mana.
Yeah, well, to be fair, 2 mana Divination's actually pretty strong, and it's not like that's its primary mode. It's just, but in a lot of games, you'll end up doing that, and it'll be a pretty fine play, and especially with a deck like
also
this.
When I play with the Null Drifters, I'm a big fan of playing with 1 Shifting Woodlands for the Sowing Myco spawns. I found that card to not be that, I can understand playing it without the Null Drifters, but I really like it when I have them because I get into these spots where maybe you just evoke Null Drifter and kick a Myco spawn, but then next turn the Shifting Woodlands can be the Null Drifter, and you've already destroyed one of your opponent's lands once. So the 4/4 Annihilator one with kind of haste in that sense is going to be pretty valuable.
Yeah, Shifting Woodland is a super powerful card. I've learned that, I'll tell you what.
And then I mean, I've played Shifting Woodland in this deck so much that obviously it's not uncommon to just have the 13/13 protection from instants, just one-shot your opponent. That's part of the appeal to it as well. But certainly the Null Drifters help because that's a card that puts itself in your graveyard.
Yeah, totally. And then, when you're playing for Sowing Myco Spawn, it's nice to have kind of a land tutor package. You've got Boseiju and Bojuka Bog and Ghost Quarter.
Not actually any good with the Myco Spawn.
Right.
But I have played Boseiju in this deck because I'll play with Stirrings and Rumble very often, and it's just actually a disenchant that gets hit by both of those cards, which isn't a thing that really exists outside of that and Haywire Might anyways.
Yeah, I gotcha. wasn't thinking about that, but Arena of Glory. This person's got Arena of Glory.
Yeah, I
Anyways,
see
too.
they have the arena and the raise board. They've got some kind of plan going on. The
It's
speaker
admirable.
also, people used to play Through the Breach Emrakul Ugin Slab stuff. That was really only when the One Ring was legal. But I was thinking about how Formidable Speaker could ramp you into Through the Breach, but also, it's kind of a nice card to put in your deck if you're playing 4 copies of the 15 mana Emrakul, because you might want to discard it for something else, but you also might want your one of Emrakul when you need it.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Okay, so you're not certain the Formidable Speaker's here to stay, but it's interesting that people are trying it. It could be worth it.
Yeah, and this isn't the only deck that, I think a lot of modern decks might be trying this card, and a few of them I kind of enjoy the fact that it taps for 1 mana, basically, because you can untap a 2 mana land.
Okay, so fundamentally, is this a weaker deck than the Eldrazi Tron deck, or is it stronger?
I like it more. I guess I would put it we can put it below Jeskai Blink. I think in general, maybe this type of big mana strategy is not what I'd be playing right now. I think, they're not even fully capitalizing on the Boros Energy matchup. I think both of those are like close. I guess they might be bullying the Jeskai Blink matchups. That sounds kind of scary for them. Though they do have a bunch of consigns, and I'll say, as much as you can overpower consign by being a nice redundant deck and things like Kozilek's Return, being instant matter, and I remember you even said this a long time ago, and it stuck with me, is that, consign against these decks is just a 1-for-1 in the end. But you are spending a bunch of your mana to get your thing countered by 1 or 2 mana is definitely a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, it's about as good as a 1-for-1 as it gets, so...
Yeah.
They could also play the Charm on their sideboard too, right?
Jeskai Blink does usually, I think. Yeah. It's even scarier because of all the blinking, right?
Right, exactly. Okay. So a good click. If you're going to play one of the Eldrazi decks, you recommend the green version, but still.
Yeah, it's hard for me to probably
medium.
ever change my mind about that, I guess, though. Just maybe the way I like playing my decks. Yeah. I like playing with Rumble and Ancient Stirrings and stuff like that,
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I pointed out right away with the other deck, right, is that there's no real selection, and you said that you're just kind of hoping to draw either one of your 4 Ugins or one of your Karns. And if you draw two of one of them, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I would probably think if I thought Karn was really, really good, I'd be more interested in the Tron deck. But sometimes you can fit Karn into the green deck too.
Yeah,
it's a little bit more awkward, but not that much.
I'll start a screen share here.
Talk about Affinity next when we get to it.
Okay, Affinity. Capricorn Affinity.
Yeah, so, this is a deck that really got popular at Pro Tour Edge of Eternities, and it seems like the ball's still rolling on it. I think weirdly, I've looked at some stats and it makes sense to me intuitively. I think this deck might be unfavored against Boros, but I think it's a strong enough deck that it's still performing really well, and it's really a combo killer in my mind. It's just gets to the board really quickly and has the Saga toolbox that usually is really good. It has a bunch of Metallic Rebukes, and the Sink and the Stupors really matter as well. It's like a perfect... it plays Sink and the Stupor not as like a blue pitch card really, though I think it's not weird to have Force Negation in the 75, but because this deck really only needs like 3, maybe 4 mana, and it needs to play a lot of mana sources because of the Moxen and stuff, and just to get, off the ground rolling. But it's really happy to just, play out to the board the first 2 or 3 turns, mass its board, and then just pass with Sink in the Stupor, and that's lethal or something like that,
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It is 4 weapons manufacturing kind of
that's the norm
thing now?
With the Engineered Explosives and Claws of Gix, and then usually Arcbound Ravager in small numbers. I've seen even Salvage Titan before. I guess that's fallen out of favor, though I'm not sure that's worse. My friends played it at the NRG Champs, and they really liked it. And, so Salvage Titan, this is an old card. I'll go ahead and read it. This is one I used to love as a kid. It's from Shards of Alara. 4 black for a 6/4 artifact creature. And you may sacrifice 3 artifacts rather than pay the spell's mana cost. And then you could exile 3 artifact cards from your graveyard to return it from your graveyard to your hand. So the joke is you're only casting it by sacrificing 3 artifacts. If you draw the manufacturing, you can just put this on the stack and deal 6 damage, and it's kind of resilient. Yeah, I'm not sure what's better. I'll admit that I think both Arcbound Ravager and Salvage Titan are not going to be very good if you don't have a weapons manufacturing, but also you kind of need stuff in your deck to really pay you for having that. And the other really nice part about weapons manufacturing is that people often play Wrath of the Skies or Pest Control against this deck, and that can really be a punisher against those types of cards.
Okay, makes sense. Well, this deck's funny to me because Mox Opal was banned and Affinity decks weren't that good. Then all of a sudden they both unbanned Mox Opal, and then they printed Pinnacle Emissary and Weapons Manufacturer, all these new cards. So yeah, this deck's gotten really popular from what I can tell, and I like it. I remember watching the Modern Pro Tour, and I can't remember the gentleman's Shuhei Nakamura was playing, and I was really rooting for him, and I was impressed by how this deck just gets on the board really quick, and then you just hold up like one counterspell or two counterspells, and that really can get the job done sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, stuff like turn 2 Cap Cannoneer is not that weird, which, can kind of win the game by itself. Or if you have Mox Opal, you can play Urza Saga on turn 1 and get the constructs on turn 2 and 3, and that's also kind of good enough to win the game by itself. This deck also maybe has new cards from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think that's up in the air. People are trying them. There's a lot of artifact cards in that set. I'd mentioned Skateboard as an honorable mention before. Unsure if tapping a permanent is better than giving Ward 1. I think I've thought about some examples recently where I could believe Ward 1 is more valuable. I imagined, not in this deck because it doesn't have Tamiyo, but some of the decks that have Urza Saga have Tamiyo, and I was thinking about, what if I played a Tamiyo and gave it haste to get the clue right away, and then my opponent untapped and cast Flage to kill my Tamiyo? Like, I would just so much, I would just love for it to have Ward 1. It would be a huge deal against such an expensive removal spell for it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, against Lightning Bolt, Ward 1 might not really matter. But yeah, once I started thinking about how Flage interacts with things, then that really made me think about the Ward 1 being really valuable.
Yeah. I mean, what's the idea with Skateboard? You just like tap a blocker?
Yeah, I think so. They can't double block, or maybe it's just lethal when I think Skateboard, if you're choosing to get it off Urza Saga, will probably feel better than the boots. But you might not choose it to get it off Saga as often as you draw it, and maybe when you draw the boots, it's better because you're going to draw this one of, and you don't tutor Skateboard every single time you go through a Saga either. But I do think the haste is pretty relevant, in combo matchups and things like that. And it definitely can end the game one turn sooner a lot. And those combo decks might have something like Arboreal Grazer or Thundertrap Trainer, and tapping that down and preventing the jump block might be the difference between winning and losing.
Okay, makes sense.
I guess the other card people play is Krang, but people don't even really like Thought Monitor already. So in order for them to want to play Krang, you kind of have to believe that's better than Thought Monitor.
Right, I forgot about that card.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess because weapons manufacturing must be like eating up some of that slot, right? Because it's not an artifact itself. It's sort of like a payoff thing.
Yeah, and honestly, it seems like Thoughtcast is not even in all these lists anymore, which I'm surprised about. I used to think I like Thoughtcast. I think it's cheap enough, that it doesn't get too clunked up in your hand, even when things aren't going wrong or things aren't going like perfect for you. Mm-hmm. But I guess they're kind of just not in the deck anymore. Interesting.
Do you remember if Shuhei's deck had Thoughtcast? I think it did.
Yeah. The Japanese players had 4 Thoughtcast and like 2 Thought Monitor.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
These main deck Emerys are kind of taking those thoughts, I'll admit. I think Emery was a common sideboard card in these decks, but I guess they've just decided to include the main deck now.
I mean, it can be pretty powerful to play a really early Emery.
Yeah, I mean, Emery's, in my opinion, the best card with affinity for artifacts ever, even though it doesn't literally say those words on it. I guess this printing does. That's good. But the original printing didn't actually say affinity for artifacts.
Oh, it doesn't really? Fine. Yeah. Yeah, it's nice that Affinity has some affinity cards in it, I will say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Kappa Canyon is close enough.
Yeah, I guess so. It's fun to see Arcbound Ravager back, too. That's kind of a throwback one in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, the being able to tutor Clausewitz thing is definitely pretty powerful with the weapons manufacturing. I think that's a pretty important card.
Yeah. So easily one of the most popular decks.
Yeah, we could put that on. I like this deck the most out of all the decks we've talked about, so we can put it in A. in my opinion. I think I had it
Okay.
maybe an S before, but yeah.
I think you had it an S last time, but
Yeah.
metagame positioning matters. Still an amazing deck, apparently. Never going to get me playing it though, because I'm not going to buy 4 Mox Opal. But
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah. They need to reprint that one pretty badly, I think.
yeah. Um, let's see. So then there's like this. You want to talk about this deck? This is
Yeah,
the
let's talk
Izzet
about Izzet
Affinity type deck.
Metalcraft is what people often call it.
Okay.
Joseph Puglisi, I know, got second at the regional championship I played at with this type of deck. So this deck is, I guess I have Mox Amber as what I said for the picture, because it usually has 4 Tamiyo, 4 Emery. It usually has Corey Steel-Cutter. It has, like 3 Mox Amber, 4 Mox Opal. Usually Unholy Heat, which is a nice selling point to this deck. I guess this list doesn't have that, but it's pretty good at getting Delirium, and with Quantum Riddlers and Primeval Titans and such being in the format, Unholy Heat is certainly pretty appealing. This is more of a combo version you have pulled up, which is a good time to talk about that too, because there's kind of a new combo people have been pointing at. Matt Costa on Twitter had tweeted about some deck lists he was playing that he thought were really strong. So the combo here was with Sewer Valence Cam, which is an artifact that costs a single blue. It has flash. When it enters or leaves the battlefield, you may tap or untap target creature, and you can pay 3 and a blue and sack it to draw 2 cards. The combo involves having an Emery that you're able to activate, so either one you've untapped with or one you've equipped with a haste artifact, which can be both skateboard. It could be skateboard, lava spur boots, or Corey Steel-Cutter or whatever. There's actually a lot of haste artifacts these decks tend to play. Or you could use Agatha's Soul Cauldron to give the Emery ability to a creature. So, maybe not the hardest requirement as it would usually be to untap with a creature with an activated ability. Then you need to have Grinding Station, which is known from Underworld Breach days. And then you need to have a Sewer Valence Cam, and you need to have a 0 mana artifact that taps for mana, like Mox Opal or Mox Amber. And from there, each time you sack the Sewer Valence Cam and recast it to the Emery, you can mill your opponent 3 cards and get 2 Emery activations. So you're like alternating activating Emery to get back the Sewer Valence Cam or the Mox that makes a mana. And the mana that you get from the Mox will pay for the Sewer Valence Cam, and you can just mill your opponent that way.
Okay, nice. And I guess the idea is you can kind of play this in a shell that's also just like an Affinity-ish deck with Corey Steel-Cutter.
Yeah, it's pretty... I mean, the Steel-Cutter version is pretty different from what I've seen. I've seen... What I would like if you're more combo-oriented is I kind of like the idea of playing with Rumbles, maybe a couple Cauldrons. You could play some Urzas because it's not a bad card to put under Cauldron. I also think Urza is kind of maybe friends with the Sewer Valence Cam cards because it'll just give you a lot of mana to draw 2 cards off this, because this card's kind of clunky if you're not drawing 2 cards.
Right.
Maybe not 4 Urzas like the days when Urza was new, but just a couple or something like that. Especially if you're going to go the Cauldron direction. You could also play this card with Goblin Engineer, I've seen. Which you can like sack this to get something bounce back, but then untap the Goblin Engineer and keep... You have to spend mana each time. In Legacy, there's a bunch of combos that have opened up with Goblin Welder, which doesn't cost any mana to activate. So you can do infinite combos with Sewer Valence Cam and Goblin Welder. You can just alternate whatever artifact with Sewer Valence Cam that you want for free, which is infinite in many ways. Including Skateboard can tap any permanent. So I've learned you can alternate this and Skateboard to just tap all your opponent's lands every turn if you don't actually have a win.
Okay, nice.
But in Modern, the Engineer costing a mana means that's not necessarily a core piece of the deck, but it is nice. You can tutor and put the Grinding Station in your graveyard and then get it back or things like that.
Mm-hmm. So do you also like a version of this deck without this combo then?
Yeah.
Just like Corey Steel-Cutter and Emery and Tamiyo?
Yeah. I don't know if I have an exact list. I mean, we could look at the one, it might be really old. Like if you looked at the RC in Vegas, you wouldn't be able to find it. I can link it to you really quick. I'm sure there's newer ones that might have some things, but it's mostly just Skateboard or whatever instead of Lava Spur Boots. Okay, so yeah, this is kind of more what I was talking about. It's Tamiyo, Emery, Izzet Steel-Cutter. What Joseph added as an innovation that, it's a silly card to call it an innovation, but he played Quantum Riddlers, which, as I've kind of played around with the deck a little, I actually have come to like a lot. It's all silly thing this thing, but he's not doing anything. I guess he had a main deck consigned, but he's not really cheating out the Quantum Riddler. It's more just that, like, when you play with all these Moxen, you can just do the thing that Quantum Riddler is kind of designed to do, where you warp it and draw 2 cards, and then maybe hardcast it in a turn or 2, and draw 2 cards again. But you do it at a really accelerated rate. Like, you're warping it on turn 3 and drawing 2 cards, Because
Okay.
you just kind of empty your hand so quickly with this type of deck, and also that it helps flip Tamiyo, and it's obviously just a powerful card. But I think this deck empties its hand so effectively that, and empties it in a way that it has a lot of spare mana, that I think it works out really well.
So it's like an Affinity Shell, but you don't go all in on the artifacts, but you still use that kind of core.
Yeah, so it's this awkward spot where I think it gets to play pretty high card quality, but you still need to draw your cards in a pretty good combination. I do think, this core of Tamiyo, Emery, and playing like 7 Moxen and Mishra's Bauble, and obviously that's always going to be in there too, is just something that, if you had to guess what one of the most powerful things you could do in Modern is, I just think this has got to be up there to play all these blue legends and these artifacts in combination, and there's the Saga, of course, too. And then from there, things can be flexible. I like Steel-Cutter as a card with all the zeros. It's pretty good at closing games really quickly, and also when you play with Emery, I think it's important to play some kind of artifacts that can really affect the game in a powerful way. Just to randomly mill over with Emery and stuff like that. Also, Emery can protect your Steel-Cutter from, just getting destroyed. And you have this toolbox of Saga and Emery to, you can get Aether Spellbomb or Tormod's Crypt, and, maybe just lock out certain decks with those two, like Emery plus a recursive artifact like that. Emery's also just part of why I said earlier it's one of the best cards with Affinity ever, is because the ways you typically beat Affinity are destroying their things. Is just the most common way, and Emery is just this creature that is usually not vulnerable to those types of things. Even Wrath of the Sky, super popular card in Modern. It's kind of hard to always get the Emery alongside if you wrap them, because if they're doing things fast enough, you're going to need the Wrath for, even 0 sometimes, but 1 or 2, and just each extra mana you tax them would be a big deal. And yeah, Force of Vigor, another, Force of Vigor, Wear Tear, just cards that are typically really good against Affinity. And Emery is just kind of a counter to those cards naturally, while still being an artifact payoff.
Yeah, makes sense. Emery's a wizard, so you can play.
So this deck also has Flame of Anor. Yeah, you could also they usually play Blood Moon in the sideboard instead of either of the Maguses. I'm saying Magus, but I mean Magus of the Moon or Harbinger of the Seas. But they have access to any of those things. Magus and Harbinger are both wizards also. But I've talked about this with someone recently, and they pointed out to me that, Blood Moon is pretty good against maybe Goryos and Jeskai Blink, which are notably Solitude decks. So playing a creature in that slot doesn't make as much sense.
Mm-hmm. How do you like Flame of Anor power level wise in Modern? I see a lot of these decks do well in like leagues and challenges and never really break through, that have, they're like Grixis mid-range decks, that sort of thing with wizards.
Yeah, it's
built around Flame of Anor.
Yeah, I think it's not like exceptionally powerful. 5 damage is really an awkward breakpoint right now, I'd say. I really do like that this deck can be an Unholy Heat deck. I think, if you had to decide you were playing this version of the deck that has, 4 heats, it's probably because you think that card's really well positioned in Modern, which I still think is true. I think there's a lot of Riddlers and Flayage and Primeval Titans to justify, playing this card.
Yeah, that is a lot of creatures as skills. Kind of just like Source of Plowshares.
Some cards I've kind of liked in this deck that don't really see any play at all, that I'll talk about. I found one of Ragavan to be kind of reasonable. You have Legends, it makes an artifact, you clear the way for it a lot. I think you already have too much of a legendary problem to maybe put a lot of copies in your deck. But I think you should just play the first one. I think it's, against decks that don't present blockers, it's basically still the best card you could ever play.
Sure, kind of a free roll. Almost like a 5th Tamiyo in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And then another weirder one that I have not actually played games with, but when I played this deck a lot, it was kind of the next thing I was planning on adding, is maybe 1 or 2 Faithless Looting. I see this deck has a Preordained, so that's where I'd be looking at it. It's just, you draw a lot of these mocks in redundantly. The real reason I kind of got interested in it is because I was just looking for flashback cards or things that do something similar. Because what happens a lot is you'll just play Emeries and they'll die, and it feels so weird to me, I guess, to play out a game where I mill 8 or 12 cards and have just it amounts to nothing. Like these cards in my graveyard aren't doing anything, and I just kind of wanted something else I could get off that. And with the Riddlers and it going lower on cards is not a disaster in your Riddler deck, anyways. It also can like instantly flip Tamiyo. You're also a Steel-Cutter deck, so going down a card, but to potentially trade extra lands for spells. I just think I'd probably play 1 or 2 the next time I played this deck.
Okay, makes sense. At least try it. This whole deck in general seems like maybe it's not quite finished being built. It's a work in progress type deck. And in that sense, are you confident where you would want to put it on the tier list?
No, I'm not. I'll say Rojo in our Discord, and one of my close friends, I've been talking to him about the deck a little bit, and he's been liking it. But that's really all I have to go off of. I'd probably put it around Jeskai Blink, to be honest. Just kind of evenish. It's a little unknown, but I kind of have some faith in the power level of the cards.
Okay.
I think it's a card I played a lot before the last, or a deck I played a lot before the last Pro Tour. I'll say it's in my mind a little bit of a pet deck to me, even though I kind of stopped seriously considering it. I think the black-white Blink decks at the time were pretty popular, and weirdly I thought those were kind of tough matchups, but those decks aren't really popular at all anymore.
Yeah. Okay, well, it definitely sounds like a lower confidence decision for you, but I mean, that putting it there in the B tier sounds fair. Okay, so for our next deck, let's see, what's another popular deck? We could talk about Domain Zoo. How about that one?
Yeah, I'm a huge hater of Domain Zoo. I would put it in F. I would not recommend it for as popular
that's
as it
fair.
is.
Has it gotten anything new? Is it still just kind of the same mopey deck?
Yeah, I'm looking. This has nothing new. They're still doing the doorkeeper thrall thing is a
4?
Yeah, it's a stock part of the deck now.
Oh, wow.
They can cheat out Flage, but they don't get the ETB.
Hey, they could do some null drifting. That's cool.
Yeah. This deck, to me, I think, I'm sure I said this last time, it's leaning on this Leyline Scion interaction that I feel like doesn't actually beat anybody. And, it's like the decks have answers to the Leyline, where Boros can even overpower Leyline with Goblin Bombardment. I was actually in a Discord, and it wasn't even about Domain Zoo, but we were just talking about stuff on the Modern ban list, and the Rhinos deck got in conversation. I mentioned how the Rhinos deck, I feel like maybe, even though, it had cards banned from it, but you could just play like Shardless Agent and Ardent Plea and play a Rhinos deck still if you wanted to Modern, and that's not anything in sight. My point is, there was a Mox kind of shortly after the Violent Outburst ban, where 2 of the players that worked together did do that, and they played it with Leyline Scion as well, and they played against Boros Energy, and I watched them have like the Leyline, play the Scion on turn 2, and they played like Shardless Agent into Ardent Plea, made 4 Rhinos with Hexproof, Lifelink, all these abilities, and I think if they didn't make the second pair of Rhinos, they would have lost to Boros Energy. I think that 3 like 4/4 Hexproof, Lifelink things would have lost to kind of a very absurd Boros Energy draw, to be fair, but they just did like the full-on like cat bombardment, make a million tokens
block,
thing.
Sack.
They could block. Yeah, well, they have trample, but just attack and sack.
Attack and sack, sure.
Yeah.
This deck seems like it's sort of maybe a bad Jeskai Blink deck. Like, it seems like maybe it fits in the same kind of dynamic, but just...
Yeah, and there's just so much about this deck that it just seems... Yeah, exactly. It's kind of combo-y. One of the huge issues with this deck is you're just, like, bad against Blood Moon. Like, really bad. I'm sure... the Leyline helps. If you have the Leyline, you can get a basic. But you're not always going to have the Leyline. And then, that's the other thing. You play a Leyline in your deck. You just are going to draw it as your first draw step or things like that all the time.
Right. No way to pitch it or anything. Okay. Well, fair enough. F tier. That's how you had it last time, too. So
I'll say the last event I played with Boros Energy that was that RCQ, I went 5-1 in, and my loss was to Domain. But
yeah. What about Amulet Titan?
I still have to at least... I'll jump right away. I got to at least put this in A.
Okay.
I mean,
above Affinity even, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Man.
Ashiok is really popular right now, so
Mm-hmm.
that's a little scary. I'll admit. We could put it below Affinity, but
Okay.
I think Amulet is just this deck that I just never think it's going to be horrible on a weekend. And if you put the time in and learn this deck, it might not be the best choice every weekend, as in like the highest win rate that you could have picked. But I kind of just refuse to believe it would be like under 50% on any weekend. I think it's just that strong. And I think even when everyone's kind of gunning for it, it's really hard to do that. And it's not that effective because, they're mostly just 3-mana sorcery permanents that people play to beat this deck. And this is a deck that can win on turn 2. It often wins on turn 3. So them playing 3-mana permanents is just not even a thing that just works on the draw. They need a lot of interaction to work. On the other hand, I'll say it's kind of capped at how good it can be at the same time. I think that it has maybe some consistency problems, it can't just win every game if undisrupted, because it does have to like mulligan kind of aggressively and draw its cards in a combo like order.
Yeah, it makes sense. Ice Soul Explorer, I think it was a part of the main deck for a while, wasn't it?
It was maybe, but mostly it's been a sideboard card.
Okay.
We've been seeing 4 Zenith really caught on after the RC Vegas was won by Nathan Goldberg, we saw that combo list was from them, Nathan of Guiltleaf. But is there a list from like Capricioso? That's Dom Harvey, the Amulet Master.
Here we go.
Great. I saw he was playing around. He had a Formidable Speaker as kind of a package to get other things. I think
Gotcha.
the one of Formidable Speaker makes a lot of sense in this deck with a bunch of Zeniths, because I kind of think, if you Zenith for it, it's a good chance that it'll produce more than 1 mana. So it meant you had 4 mana that turn, and then next turn you'll have 6 mana probably, because if you have any land that taps for more than 1 mana, then that'll get you there. And yeah, it's kind of, I know that's kind of a toolbox within a toolbox, but it's kind of a mana dork. It's like you get to Zenith for a mana dork and a Titan in your hand, something like that.
Right. It would open up the possibility that your Green Sun Zenith can get a non-green creature, although I don't think he's taking advantage of that. I don't know what you would do. Just a thought.
I also, I don't mind seeing the Dryad Arbor in the sideboard. It's kind of silly, but it is a card that's very vulnerable to small ball removal, which this deck is not really vulnerable to that at all.
Okay.
So I could see it just being better in post-board games, and you don't even want to bother getting it. But maybe if in an open deck list tournament, you might want to main deck it or things like that, because you'll have the option more. I do know drawing the Dryad Arbor really sucks a lot of the time.
Okay.
The other thing that I found really annoying, the Wandering Minstrel. Also, I don't mind seeing in the sideboard, to be honest. Kind of the same thing. Your opponent might take out some of the small ball removal, and they might go up on disenchant effects for Amulet and Spelunking. But this being something you can Zenith for that can't get hit by those effects really puts your opponent in a bind. And I'll also say, thinking about Amulet Mirrors, I think this is like an amazing thing for Amulet Mirrors, because you really don't want Dismember in the mirror at all. You basically want 0 outs to the Wandering Minstrel in the mirror, and I think even if your opponent had one, you just don't really want to board in anything that would answer it. And the mirror is very much about killing each other's Spelunkings and Amulets with Beseju and Force of Vigor. So something kind of invulnerable to that either is going to just be invulnerable or force your opponent to bring in Dismember, which is, a dead card unless you put your Minstrel into play, basically. It is pretty powerful.
Yeah, I'm sure that matchup's more about speed than interaction, so makes sense.
It's surprisingly interactive, I think. There's a lot of stuff post-board, the Besejus and Forces.
Okay, but not really stuff that hits the Minstrel, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I guess once Minstrel and Ice Till Explorer get involved, because I think Ice Till is probably pretty good in those grindier post-board games too, then you probably want to introduce Dismember, but still, it's an awkward thing. And I always think that, especially in Modern, it's not that bad if your opponent has to like board in more cards to answer a thing, even if that thing is known about or face up, like that means they still have to like board out more of their A plan or something like that in order to fit that in.
Okay, makes sense. So easily one of the best decks in Modern still, you think? Maybe not as well positioned as it was last time we did a tier list, but
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure what I have in mind for S tier, if anything, but that's fine. I don't really mind there being nothing if that's how it ends up.
Yeah, we could maybe put one thing there just to like cap off of what you think is the best.
Yeah, if we get to nothing at the
But
end, then we'll move the highest thing in A tier to S. But yeah.
yeah, I mean, it does say something, I guess, that there's just nothing that's really standing out in your mind.
Yeah, there's certainly nothing in Modern right now that I think is like a super broken must play deck.
So it depends how you consider the tier list. But yeah, okay. Well, let's go on to Goryo's Vengeance. This is a favorite I know of Jerry Thompson's because I listened to his podcast.
Yeah, as much as I have not found success with this deck, I think I have a better understanding of it. I do think you're supposed to mulligan pretty aggressively with this deck, more so than even the Jeskai Blink deck, in the same ways where you have Riddler and flickering it to kind of recover from your mulligans, but you also have combos, and those combos recover for your mulligan as well. I know I've talked with Alan Wu, Boulder teammate, who loves this deck, and he'll just say he boards out the combo in all the matchups, but I feel like that's kind of a hyperbolic, but it is true. I think you can board out a lot of the combo or almost all of it, or I believe we witnessed this on camera. It might have been versus Affinity, actually, because they just have like all those main deck Tormod's Crypts and counter magic. But the Goryo's player had like Wrath of the Skies and stuff. I think what happened is that he boarded out all the Goryos and like 2 Atroxes, which is kind of a cool thing to do, because they do play a Breeding Pool or Hedge Maze, or I guess this list randomly has Overgrown Tomb, but a green land, both for Prismatic Ending, but also to eventually hard cast Atroxa.
Okay.
So changing into just like an Esper control deck, when your opponent is also boarding in a bunch of Graveyard Hate, now the Graveyard Hate does absolutely nothing, so that's kind of an advantage for you. Atroxa is 7 mana, and if you're playing a control deck, a 7 mana kind of win condition is not the craziest thing to achieve.
I guess not. We are playing a 21 land deck, but
yeah, I mean, you have a lot of things that draw cards. I will say the land count in this deck is my least favorite part about it.
Yeah.
And it's why I felt like I've lost a lot with it. And, let's take the Jeskai Blink deck, for example. There's not much going on in this deck that would make you want less lands than the Jeskai Blink deck. And to me, it's just a matter of they just like need to fit in all their cards. But, I played this deck with, I think, 21 lands every time I tried it in testing for EOE, and I kind of swore to myself that I would just force myself to play at least 22 if I kept playing it, but nobody does that.
Faithful Mending
that's
draw
like
you into some, but I don't know. You could just discard your lands too, right?
And it's just like, I don't know, when you point out the mulliganing thing, or I do, but about Riddler Ephemerate or something like that, but like you still need 3 lands for that to work, and it's actually kind of hard to have 3 lands and that is what I found.
In a 21 land deck, yeah, it certainly is. I mean, that's really low. That's like the kind of thing if you had a lot of cantrips you would play. This deck doesn't even have those.
And it's 21 lands, and like 3 of them are tapped all the time, and so like sometimes you hit your land drop and it's tapped when you really needed it to be a 3rd untapped mana, because I think this deck does just want, its 3rd land untapped a lot. Yeah, I don't know. I've talked to people. I think when you play this deck, I would be very much playing towards hitting your land drops as much as possible, because you really need them, and your deck's pretty bad at doing that. So, just thinking about the ways to maximize drawing lands after you keep a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, it's pretty weird.
What if we played some of the, the flip spell lands for pitching?
Yeah, Sink into Stupor. This deck used to be 20 lands with 1 Sink into Stupor, and now it's evolved into just 21 normal lands. I don't know why there's a Cephalid Coliseum in this list. I would ignore that, but
yeah, okay. All right. I mean, it does have, so it's like kind of like the Jeskai Blink deck. You've got this more powerful combo angle in theory, and then, Psychic Frog's kind of the hell of a card.
Yeah, and this is, I feel like, a long time Modern thing that people love, and I love it too, which is like, I think the boarding out the Goryos thing is like, it's worth a lot when it works. When your opponent just boards in a bunch of Graveyard Hate, and you don't need your graveyard to beat them. And not only do you not need your graveyard, you don't even draw like a card that gets punished by their Graveyard Hate, really.
Yeah.
Then you end up cards in that kind of regard, but it's a thing that I think doesn't always work.
It's like a fun big brain move.
Yeah, it's been such a graveyard deck thing in Magic for a long time. I feel like it's a
Right.
common juke.
Okay. All that being said, I mean, if you're going to quantify it, what sort
Out
of
of
thing
respect
are
for
we
the
looking
people
at?
that talk to me about this deck, I keep it equal with the Jeskai Blink deck, I guess, also in that category. We can put it a little bit above.
Okay. Balanced deck. Still not quite as good as Boros, you would say, on average,
I
especially
just
for
think
most
Boros is,
people.
yeah, so weirdly kind of good right now. I think it's really related to the popularity of Jeskai Blink and Affinity, though.
Okay. Makes sense. All right. What other deck you want to tackle here?
Let's talk about Prowess.
Speaking of, okay,
I'm just looking at
Prowess.
the pictures at this point. We can
Sure.
go a little faster. I think Prowess is in a really similar space to Boros. I think it's strength so that it can win a bit faster. It has more turn 3 kills if your opponent does nothing. In fact, I'm not sure Boros. I'm sure you might be able to construct a turn 3 kill nowadays, but really rare. This deck, if you play one drop into Cutter or Show Off, with the Cutter you need to also have a 0. If you do that, then on turn 3 it's not that weird to win. It's not that weird
Okay.
to count to 20, especially if you have like a Lava Dart.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be spending 3 mana worth of spells and get like a 0 mana spell in like Lava Dart Flashback or Mutagenic or Bolting Face multiple times, but it's not that weird.
You were playing around with the Learn lesson package from Pioneer. How did that go?
Yeah, so I think Academic Dispute is a really high variance cards, but I'm not sure it's high variance in a bad way. I just think, it can range from like make your opponent block your Swift Spear or whatever, and you draw a Firebending lesson like against Boros on the play or something like that, to being kind of like a crappy Preordain at its worst. And it can be extra crappy because it could get fizzled by removal, but like it's a spell that could draw another spell, which is something a Prowess deck is pretty happy with.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously the types of spells you could draw are limited and take up sideboard slots. But what I mean by high variance is like I suspect it's possible that it's like it ranges from being really broken to being kind of mediocre and not it can range from being like a card that is like below average game in hand win percentage to being like the best card in your deck. But
Yeah. It seems like, I mean, I've played with against and with that card a lot in Pioneer, and it's really strong. It seems like maybe the kind of thing that that particular build of this deck might be a way you want to go if you, for some reason, were kind of confident what the metagame would be and you felt like that was a good place to be. Whereas if you weren't quite as sure and you wanted a more, open-ended deck, you might not play that package.
yeah, I kind of have issues with the mana curve of the stock Prowess list. I just think like 4 Show Off, 4 Iteration, 4 Cutters is a lot of 2 drops. So I fit in all this stuff by cutting Show Off entirely, including 4 Storm Chasers talents, and then no Violent Urges, less Mutagenic Growths. I actually had less Lightning Bolts because I thought the Academic Disputes were doing a similar thing.
Yeah, I guess.
And Boomerang Basics, which Boomerang Basics is also like, we know Storm Chasers talent, Boomerang Basics, it's a powerful combo. It's hard to know if it's worth doing in Modern, but it does unlock some things where, I think like Psychic Frog is kind of annoying for this deck. It gets in the way. It's hard for it to deal with damage-based removal, but, you could sometimes just Boomerang Basics it. And
Yeah, that would be pretty good. This deck, actually, looking at it, like, it has a lot of cheap cards, but it doesn't actually have that many 1-mana proactive plays. It's got these guys.
yeah, exactly. It only has 8, so I have 12.
Mhm.
So that's also like, you can point it's like Show Off as speed. That's good in the matchups you really need to be fast as Prowess. But I think, if you have one drop, if you're missing a 1 drop but you have the Show Off, that might not be true. Maybe it might, and maybe in a list of 12 1-drops you play triple 1-drop more often or things like that.
Yeah, or you just
fast.
starting with a 1-drop more often would matter too.
Yeah. Also, so yeah, the Boomerang Basics also can be worth like multiple spells in the same thing, because what I was doing is you could like go Cutter Bobble on 2 and then not crack the Bobble for a turn so that you can pick it up with Boomerang Basics to get more Prowess triggers on the next turn.
Okay.
So it's not purely just a combo Storm Chaser's talent. And in fact, I had the idea of main decking a Tormod's Crypt. I think I would definitely, with Boomerang Basics, never play Surgical. I would just play Tormod's Crypt, because I do think bouncing your own 0-mana artifact is pretty valuable in this deck.
Makes sense. And then gives you another 0-mana play for Corey. Okay. All right. Well, pretty simple deck, decently popular.
Yeah, it's never that bad. It's got a lot of strength on being fast.
Yeah.
I think you're going to have games where you get picked apart and all your stuff gets answered, but it's a lot harder when you draw the cutter for that to happen.
It's funny that
Basically.
this is definitely a deck that like I could probably build decently easily because I probably have a lot of the deck, but I'm just so disinterested because it's just prowess in every format. I'm just so tired of it. But
Let's move Boros up and leave Prowess where you had it. That's
okay.
yeah.
Okay, so you think it's above Goryo's and Jeskai Blink and all that by a
Yeah,
little
I
bit?
like it right now. I think it's pretty good. I'm kind of up on a lot more after playing Pioneer. I don't think Corey Steel-Cutter is like, the absolute best card in Modern, but I do think it's a really strong card, and I think it's the absolute best card in Pioneer, which made me respect it a lot more. Obviously
Sure.
it's banned in Standard, and it's just a really powerful card, and it scales well with the format having 0 drops, which Pioneer doesn't really even have.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Let's see. Pick another deck you like.
Let's do Belcher, because that's what I played at the Pro Tour, and I think I was really sour on it after the Pro Tour, but now I'm kind of thinking it might be kind of good again. I'm not. I guess the issue is its positioning in the metagame. I guess all these decks I have at the top look good against Belcher to me, like Affinity, Boros, and Prowess, and I think Amulet is actually not like a great matchup for Belcher. I think it's close to even.
It's definitely lost a lot of metagame share from what I remember.
Yeah, but I think, a lot of people played it for the Pro Tour, so it was the second most played deck at the Pro Tour, which kind of came out of nowhere. And I definitely think, like Ruby Storm, the lesson learned there is it's not a deck that is good into a bunch of people gunning for it, even though it did win the Pro Tour. But still, it had like a pretty bad win rate at that Pro Tour, despite 3 extra wins or whatever.
Doesn't look like you get anything new, right?
No,
So
there's
not
absolutely
like
nothing new, I think.
get to change the art on your spell snare.
Yeah, but I do think it's just like, what this deck is vulnerable to is people going after your lands, I think, in an efficient manner. And people, because Eldrazi Tron is popular, people are like playing Obsidian Charma over White Orchid Phantom or things like that. When this deck was popular, you would just always see the Phantoms or things like that because it was hitting both of them, even though it was hitting the big mana decks worse. It's because it could hit Belcher at all, whereas the Charma does nothing against Belcher.
Okay. So, I mean, I think
maybe just above the Eldrazi Ramp deck here.
Oh,
no, still in
oh,
B.
here.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Like,
not so kind of average.
Choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been looking
Kind
at
of
some
decent
stats,
choice.
and I just think when it's an under the radar deck, it's going to be pretty respectable to play.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. How about we go with Neoform as sort of another like all-in kind of combo deck.
I'm pretty high on Neoform right now.
Oh, nice. Okay. I hate
definitely
this
would.
deck.
Yeah, I think I would have it above Boros. Honestly,
right.
we could put it above Titan right now. It seems really
that's
good.
so
to me
unfortunate.
Right
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think people complain about Modern. People complain about everything, but when they complain about Modern and this isn't what they're complaining about, I get kind of mad. Because
this is definitely the worst thing.
Yeah, it's just like a deck that I really think shouldn't exist. But yeah, I think it's. If I had to describe like why you shouldn't play Boros, it's because I think this deck is a nightmare matchup for Boros, and it's not very fixable. I mean, you can play Vexing Baubles and stuff, but they come prepared for that type of stuff. Even Veil of Summer prevents their spell from getting countered by Vexing Bauble, which I think is like kind of unintuitive, but it just says your spells can't be countered.
Can't really find a list for this, but that's okay. We kind of know the joke.
Yeah.
Hey, at least Jeskai Blink, you can like put some subtleties in your sideboard or something for this, right? I mean, that's one of the good cards for this.
Yeah,
matchup.
but it's just like obviously this deck loses, and it loses to things like that, like you're describing for sure. But it's not that weird, I think, for this deck to make it to turn 3 and do its combo and have a Veil of Summer and a Pact of Negation. Veil
of Summer, dude.
It certainly has the tools to power through counter magic. It's really ready for that. I do think there are some hate cards that could be a bit more annoying for it. It actually did get a new card in Wistfulness, which is
okay.
It's a card selection spell.
Yeah,
it's a green card. This deck, everything about this deck revolves around this green card count because it needs to pitch 2 green cards to cast Allosaurus Rider. So it's always trying to max out its green card count. People at the PT, I think, played Preordains, But now I'm kind of seeing Wistfulness maybe in slot of some of those preordains, because it's green and it's a disenchant, and it also, but when you don't need a disenchant, it does something. My teammate Dan Weiser played this at the RC that I played, and he got his invite, and he wrote a really funny tournament report. He went 5-2 against Boros Energy in the course of that RC, so half his rounds because he intentionally drew, or no, he actually didn't intentionally draw. He used his draw. That was part of the story. But in that tournament report, I think he was a little bit hyperbolic, but it was just so funny because multiple times against Boros, he said, "I made a turn 2 Ureni on the play," which this list happens to not have it. But Ureni is the dragon from Dragonstorm that's a 10/10 flying protection from white and black that does damage equal to the number of lands you have to your opponent's creatures. So obviously on turn 2, it only does a Forked Bolt's worth of damage to your opponent's stuff, but on turn 2, that usually will kill their board. And more importantly, it's a 10/10 protection from white and black, which many decks in the format, including your Jeskai Blink deck, can't actually do anything about.
Right.
So they'll just take 20 from it over 2 turns. But
yeah, I mean, this is the deck that, like, if you were for some reason luckier than everyone else, this is what you would play all the time.
Yeah, I guess it's actually an 11/11 Ureni. Neoform puts a counter on it, so you can't even Flage your way out of it. But
funny.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think it's kind of like Amulet in that I wouldn't call it like super consistent. It's not doing the same thing absolutely every game, whereas I guess I would say Ruby Storm does the same thing like every game. It's got 8 of all its cards or whatever. This deck has some sculpting. It's had the Planar Genesis has been a normal card for a long time. That's the green impulse basically. Same thing, just looking for green card count.
Surely this deck's not as like resilient as the Titan deck, right?
No, absolutely not. I think this deck can certainly be attacked in the way that I've described Affinity and Belcher. It's just that this deck isn't popular at all.
Yeah.
You see 416 Frowning Table. That list, that's Jacob Milchman. He's someone I've worked with a lot. So this list will probably reflect a lot of stuff that also was some of the developments. So we see this, has the Ureni, has Repudiate Reduplicate, or Repudiate Replicate, which is a greenish stifle. So you can stifle your own stuff. But it's also a true stifle. I mean, it's 2 mana, but you can stifle a fetch land or whatever. Things like that. It's also, I guess, the copy mode, I'm guessing, won't come up, but maybe. In the sideboard, this is something that originated, I think, in that Vegas tournament. We see some Icefang Codals, which was kind of just a card they wanted against Ragavan decks.
Okay.
But then once they added them, they decided to add an Oculus so that you have the potential to just go Icefang Codal into Neoform for Oculus. Which in a post-board game, people might not, really be prepared for year 1 of Oculus. And then also I've heard stories that in grindier matchups, these players boarded in, the Icefang Codals and maybe, or the Oculus maybe, or maybe also the Codals, but not really with the plan to Neoform them, but just because they were kind of like grindy cards that work pretty well in longer games.
Yeah, some of the cards that people bring in against you will they're pretty narrow combo hate cards, so maybe they're not really executing their game plan if they draw that, so maybe you can kind of get them with an Oculus. I assume that's what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Oculus is also a card that works pretty well defensively, right? So it might buy you a lot of time.
Yeah, you're right. It just makes a bunch of tutus.
It just stalls out the blind
blocker.
Big. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Man, this deck's that good right now, huh?
Yeah, I think so. It's a deck I'll seriously be thinking about its positioning for the next Pro Tour. I do think that if it's not respected, it's definitely good, which is a scary thing because it's not very fun for it to be good.
Right. Okay.
Oh yeah, we can talk about this. Loving End, sure. That Loving End has a lot of new cards. I was pretty excited for it.
All right.
So Living End got a lot from Lorwyn Eclipse. It's not always Sultai, but much more often Sultai now because what it got is Wistfulness and Deceit and Formidable Speaker, which I guess only one of those cards is black, but Formidable Speaker helps the Sultai deck in that they were kind of capped on only 4 Shardless Agent. The biggest thing they lost was not having Ardent Plea. Sultai was, I don't know if it originated from the Seif, but it was really popularized by him on the stream. Overlord the Baelmerk plays really well in what the Living End deck tries to do. This list has a little bit of everything, so that's fine. It's pretty similar to things I would probably play anyways. Wistfulness, I think, is just an amazing addition to this deck. It's like a dream card for this deck. Obviously, when it comes back with Living End, it's just a vanilla 6/5. That's fine. Once you resolve Living End, you're fine with giant vanilla 6/5 anyways. The thing that is really key about this is, so obviously the blue-blue mode is kind of on theme with Living End. You can play it, get itself in your graveyard, maybe get another creature in your graveyard, sculpt and dig. But I think Urza Saga is a kind of a nightmare card for this deck. You know, it just gets on the board in an uncounterable way. It often can tutor graveyard hate. So if they play it, you feel like you have to do your combo of casting Shardless Agent before they go through the modes. But if you do that before they go through the modes, they can just like make 2 constructs and get, Shadow Spear, Aether Spellbomb, some artifact that matters. And maybe those 2 constructs are just going to compete with your board anyways. Plus, they can develop more things from their hand afterwards because they played the Saga. They often get the sandbag cards in their hand. And then, of course, if you don't go for the Living End, they'll just make 2 constructs and get a Tormod's Crypt or a Soul Guide Lantern, which means when you do have to Living End them, you're not going to get anything back. So having just a main deckable 4-of answer to Urza Saga that only costs 2 in a Living End deck that is normally, you can't play a 2-drop, it's just the perfect thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can see why Wistfulness was on your number 1 card from Lorwyn.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about this deck.
Yeah, there was times I was considering main decking Foundation Breaker in this deck because Urza Saga was just so annoying.
Right. Gotcha.
Also, it's not also that like you have this out to Urza Saga. It's also that you're sinkholing in Urza Saga as you do it. That's got to be a huge deal against Amulet or something like that. Maybe.
Oh yeah, totally.
Like,
yeah.
It's not like it's a horrible exchange for you to make that play anyways.
Right. Okay. And then you're just sort of the
yeah, and I like having access to 1 or 2 Deceit, especially in these Overlord. You can dig for it, you can get it back with the Overlord. I don't think you want to play a bunch of them because I think you should not build your mana with having double black on turn 2 in mind at all when you already have Wistfulness in your deck. But to clear the way of like Consign or something, I think it's nice to maybe be able to sculpt, cast the Deceit on turn 5, and then play a Shardless right after. That's like a pretty appealing kind of line to me to have access to it for.
Sure.
And the bounce is not irrelevant either. There are some annoying permanents that can stop your Living End from working, so being able to like bounce a Vexing Bauble or things like that could matter.
And that's more castable.
Yeah.
Okay. So
the
definitely
Halo Forager, also pretty cool. Can flashback Living End. It can hit your opponent's graveyard too. Also, I guess now that the Wistfulnesses are in the deck and you're going to have 4 Endurance, 4 Subtlety, maybe 1 or 2 Deceit, I could see putting a Cavern of Souls in this deck. I definitely think the land count in this deck also should be really looked at. I'm counting the Trolls, and if you play or Genercent, if you play 1 or 2 Troll, if you play any MDFCs, those all count as lands, to be clear. But I think it should be like 24 or 25. Whereas like a long time ago, Living End just had so many cyclers that it was normal to play like 22, counting all those land cyclers. But now I think your deck actually isn't cycling that much. You're kind of just playing normal Magic cards.
Funny, I think of all the evoke.
Yeah, you should. I think this deck also, it threatens to have a really good late game. I think it wants the game to go long. Like, these aren't just like dumb, stupid creatures with cycling anymore, right? Like, they're just pretty powerful cards you can play as you get more mana.
A lot of them are just big 2-for-1s and whatnot. Yeah. This deck's always funny because one of the things that happens in more powerful formats is people, play the really efficient cards, but like if you ever end up in a game where you're just casting big creatures, sometimes your opponent will be totally unprepared because their cards are efficient, but they're not actually, prepared to deal with just a bunch of 5/7s or whatever.
Yeah, no, I really think this deck is like, it's viewed wrong in Modern often. I think this deck is a lot closer to like the Omnath pile people used to play than people like to think it is.
Okay. Makes sense. Hey, like, maybe this is the deck I should build.
Yeah, I think you'd like it. I think like the other thing about Shardless Agent into Living End is that's just like a sweeper. I think people also overrate that. You need to bring back this massive graveyard, but like I don't think the card Overlord makes this a little different. But like I don't think the card Rest in Peace is like a home run against this deck, especially because it's symmetrical graveyard hate. Because like Not that any deck's really playing Rest in Peace right now because Boros has Flage, but just like hypothetically, you'd be happy to have a 3-mana 2/2 that sweeps the board before it enters in this style of deck. You know, you don't really need to get anything back. And in the time of Rhinos, you know, this is the deck that got me back to the Pro Tour, Living End, and it was different back then, and it was Temur. I just thought, you know, I didn't really even play other decks and come to the conclusion that Living End was the best. I just picked up Living End one day and never really went back. I just thought it was the best deck by a lot in that format up until it got banned. And I thought the fact that people played Rhinos really, to me, just made me think they'd never played Living End, because I was like, what do you mean? Like, my deck is just the same as the Rhinos deck, but instead of making 2 4/4s, I like wrath my opponent's board and make 10 power. Like, it's all the other same cards, you know? It's just like I still play all these free spells and have the same interaction if I want it. Stuff like
this deck's been around for a long time, and it can be pretty powerful for sure. It's got a lot of new stuff. I mean, that's one appealing thing to me is like it could really be better than it looks, because people haven't really tried all the new stuff, haven't played against it, that sort of thing. It has a surprising amount of just standard cards too, and like
it's very similar to the standard Sultai Spider-Man deck, right?
In
it has
a way,
lot of the same things.
Yeah.
And once you hit, you know, turn 4 or 5, you probably play a lot of the same things. I'm not sure about the Superior Spider-Man in this deck.
Sure.
I have some issues with it once I thought about it a little bit more. I liked that getting stuff out of your opponent's graveyard is a little appealing, but you still have endurance to deal with that. You know, for endurance, once enough bans happened, became kind of a stock main deck part of this deck, which is kind of interesting, but it makes sense because you don't want your opponent's graveyard to have stuff, and endurance is a pretty powerful card, and it's just kind of on theme anyways, and you can get it in your graveyard on the cheap too.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing, right? They actually tried to do something about this deck. They banned a card from it.
Yeah, Violent Outburst got banned, and then later Grief. When the Grief ban happened, it was kind of funny because Scam wasn't popular at all and Living End was dead, so no deck was really playing Grief. But that was right before Duskborn came out, and I think once Overlord of the Baelmerk was printed, Grief would have been an all-star card in Modern again, so it's probably for the best that Grief got banned, even though the exact window it got banned, it was basically seeing no play in Modern.
Yeah, agreed, and people hated the play pattern too, right? That matters for something. Okay, so yeah, I mean, obviously a pet deck of yours, but if you had to like rank it on the tier list, what do you think?
I don't mind putting it let's put it at the top of B.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
so
I haven't gotten the reps in, and Boros just I have been paying a lot of attention to Boros, and I think it's definitely demonstrating itself as being worthy right now. I do think Boros is the type of deck that cares more about the metagame than people, you know, being anti-Boros. I think it's kind of hard to be anti-Boros, but I think the metagame could shift to be a bit more combo heavy, and that would make the Boros players a little bit more sad, but that's not really what's happening right now, which is also why, you know, a deck like Neoform is something I'm highly recommending right now.
Yeah. Okay, for personal reasons, how much better than Jeskai Blink do you think it is?
I'd be probably more interested in I would probably recommend Living End over Jeskai Blink. I don't know how much better, but
so like slightly better.
Yeah,
okay.
If you could play it, I'd recommend starting it because it's I think just a super I don't want to say it's an underrated deck, but just misunderstood deck. I think people think, you know, you got to do the Shardless Agent thing, and it's got to be a big graveyard every game, and that's just not true at all.
Okay, cool. Just a few more decks here. We could talk about our other Overlord of the Baelmerk deck.
I don't know a lot about this deck. I would put it in D tier. If I wanted to play these cards, I would play Goryos. I don't know what to say. I would just make my deck a little bit more unfair, or the Jeskai Blink deck. You know, I just feel like this deck is doing weaker things. I wanted to bring it up because I was watching the Hunter Burton Memorial Open last weekend, and I saw this deck made it to the finals, and the player was playing quite well. They got bested by Boros. Kind of not surprising to me. I think Flage is pretty good against this deck. They were playing straight Orzhov, so, you know, not doing the Riddler thing. The advantage when you play Orzhov seems to be that you get to play Flickerwisp and Witch Enchanter and the Bogart in high numbers. So your mana is just a lot better, and you can do that kind of cool interaction where you're flickering your lands. But it's also very normal to splash Quantum Riddler, sometimes Frog, Sideboard Consign.
Yeah. Okay. But overall, you just think the red is sort of a better
and this
direction.
I like this list you have up that has Splash Riddler, doesn't have Frog, but does have Witch Enchanter. I'm sure that's a judgment call about if you want to play Frog or not, but I would not try to put Witch Enchanter and Psychic Frog in the same deck, is mostly what I'm pointing out.
Sure. And maybe if you wanted to play Frog, you should just play Goryos.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, there's other Frog decks, right? What about...
Yeah.
I heard about what you think about these a little bit. So
yeah, this one I would have to put
straight to super tier.
Straight to super tier, yeah. Yeah, these decks are just too reactive, in my opinion, in Modern. Like, the format is just way too diverse. I don't think they're even good against Boros, which is the top thing anyways. They're usually just like these really anti-combo decks, but as someone who's played a lot of combo decks and thought these decks would be scary, like, they still just have this classic, like, all reactive spell kind of issue where their cards just, like, sometimes don't work in the right order, and they can be really weak game one to these combo decks because they still play a bunch of Fatal Push and stuff like that, so you often can steal game ones, things like that.
I think Cyber Games would at least be scary, but I
agree. They probably are, and when Harbinger of the Seas is good, that's also, like, a big appeal to this type of deck. Also, lumping in, I know people have been playing with Wan Shi Tong and Demolition Field, and they're usually Dimir when they do that. I guess Nassif doesn't like when they also play Frog because he doesn't want to put Frog and Field of Ruin in the same deck. That's somewhat reasonable.
Sure.
But I don't know. You also want to play Wan Shi Tong on turn 2, which is not that different than needing to play Frog. So I'm not sure I necessarily agree with him on that.
Yeah.
And Tamiyo in these decks I respect a lot more than when I see them without. These decks are always all over the place. Sometimes they splash red for Unholy Heat, I've seen as well. They'll usually play Mishra's Bauble if they do that, of course. But all the same to me, they just kind of, I feel like, are not what I want to be doing in Modern. They don't really do anything if they don't have Psychic Frog on turn 2, is probably the huge criticism of these decks.
Yeah, it's interesting because from what I understand in Legacy, these like blue-black Frog decks are really good even after they've lost Reanimate and stuff.
Well, they lost Frog too. But
they lost Frog?
Yeah, they don't even have that card.
Oh, when did they lose Frog?
Before all the other stuff, actually.
Oh,
yeah,
right,
quite a while
right.
ago.
Okay.
I mean, well, this was a conversation we had actually in Modern Banlist stuff today, but Force of Will and Days just change the dynamic of what cards are okay. You know, like,
yeah,
when you play Frog and you have a Force of Will, I understand that you'll just win every time. Like, it's kind of,
and that's why they probably ban it. Yeah. I was gonna bring that up. That's okay. You beat me to it. All right.
Also, yeah, it was enabling Reanimate, which there's a lot of cards banned in Legacy that seemingly are because Reanimate is still legal.
Right. Fair. Like, maybe even without Reanimate, it's not as crazy, but. Okay.
All right, let's move some things around really quick because
sure.
Almost the rest of these I think might end up in B tier in my mind. So let's put Affinity in S tier. I'll say I don't have anything topping it in my mind.
Okay.
That deck's sweet. It's deserved.
So not a super standout, but probably the best thing at the moment.
And let's move up Living End because I like it.
Hell yeah.
This kind of shows I do like it a little bit cut above these other decks right now. I think it's at least worth exploring because I think it's got 3 new cards. That's crazy.
Yeah, totally. And people might not be as prepared to play against some of these other decks, right? So that matters a little bit.
Okay. The Orum's Chant control deck. This is a deck I was kind of sour on after the Pro Tour, and I kept getting respect for it. And recently, I have studied this deck a little bit, as in watched like all the feature matches from the Pro Tour that involved it, and I respect it a lot more.
Okay.
I think I'd put it above the Metal Cutter, the Mox Amber kind of deck right now. But
so kind of like Jeskai Blink territory of deck. I don't really know what its matchup spreads are like. I assume it's probably more narrow than something like Jeskai Blink would have.
Yeah, I'll say
more
I
polarized?
think this deck is kind of a combo-y prison deck and not really a control deck.
Yeah.
After watching it, I've realized, Orum's Chant is in a sense a fog, and you're a deck with fog and planeswalkers. The planeswalkers are weird because they don't have like some recurring value thing that untapping with them is super valuable for, but they're instead lock pieces that you then try to assemble some kind of lock with.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of control decks in the past have been kind of lock decks. Depends how you consider it, but
yeah, every now and then I click on a deck list for this deck, and it has 3 Teferi and still 4 Narset. And I'll just say, after watching the games, that split makes no sense to me. If I were to cut a Planeswalker from this deck, it would easily be the first Narset before the first Teferi.
Okay, so this list that I found by Gustavo Colon is
Has four of
reasonable.
both. That's great. Yeah, this looks
Yeah.
very similar to what I'm expecting. One or two Isochron Scepter is pretty normal. That can eventually kind of lock out the entire game with Orm's Chant. The joke
Hmm.
here is, if you didn't know, already, or Isochron Scepter, you can cast Orm's Chant off of, you can kick it, so they can't attack you, and they can't cast spells each turn. And if you have Teferi in play, then because they can only cast spells at sorcery speed, then they're just never going to be able to cast spells or attack you the rest of the game. This can be broken up by Boseiju or Otawara, so keep that in mind, but usually it's a hard lock against many decks in the format. They literally can never win.
Okay.
And I think ultimately you're kind of stalling. You know, if this deck does sometimes close with its various Evoke Elementals and Kahira, definitely. But most games I watched either were won by that combo or the Narset lock, which usually involves first casting a Days Undoing, which puts them to one card if it's your turn, or zero cards if you cast it on their turn with Teferi. And then it has one Gaia Reach Sanitarium that it can find. If you use that in your opponent's upkeep or draw step or whatever, then usually if they have no cards in hand, you'd want to use it in their upkeep. They draw and discard the card, and then they don't draw for turn. So if they can't contest you from that point on, they'll get no more draw steps. They can't respond by casting the spell they drew off the draw discard in the middle of it either. So it just has multiple locks, both based around their Planeswalker. I think Consult the Star Charts was a pretty good add to this deck. I see this list only has 2. I don't really know what the normal number is. I see it has 3 stock up. That sounds weird to me. I feel like I would just play all Consults, but I'm not an expert in this deck, so it's probably not that big of a deal.
Yeah, I guess you don't have a ton of like counter spells, although you have a few that you'd want.
Yeah,
consult
I like
for.
a few counter spells. Like I said, I think you're not just like a full-on control, stop everything your opponent's trying to do. You're just trying to like get these Planeswalkers, prevent them from being dying, or prevent them from stopping. I think this deck often actually ends games, not literally in the sense that you deal 20 damage to your opponent, but basically I think this deck locks your opponent out of the game kind of quickly, ideally. Like I think
Yeah, it's interesting now that you've sort of started thinking of this deck differently. You like it more. I mean, I guess you sort of learn more about it in a sense.
Yeah, and Orm's Chant also in general, I've just watched these turns where they have Teferi in play and they kick Orm's Chant in their opponent's upkeep, and it's not a lock or anything, but their opponent's not doing anything that turn.
Right.
And they're not doing anything on your turn because you have Teferi. And then those, even that's card disadvantage, you get a huge mana advantage that way because you'll just get to untap all your mana. And then, things like Consult the Star Chart and Stock Up are great when you have a huge mana advantage. As you get a mana advantage and you discard cards for that mana advantage, it makes Days Undoing less embarrassing. I've watched people, including against me at the Pro Tour, do that type of play and then maybe cast 1 or 2 Orm's Chance with Teferi's in play, but then they just end up casting Days Undoing on your turn later, which doesn't end the turn, to be clear. It's just kind of better with Flash, obviously. And they refill their hand, and you roughly, don't get that much of an advantage out of it. And sometimes they even use the Days Undoing as graveyard hate while they're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you also get Solitude and Subtlety in this deck. Those are both pretty nice.
Exactly.
It's interesting to see Path to Exile before Forced Solitudes.
Yeah, I agree.
Crazy,
that's definitely, I think that's a little weird. That's definitely not in every list.
Sure.
I think
Path seems okay.
Path is okay, I think, right now in Modern, to be fair. I think the Riddler thing has really changed what you want out of your removal, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Would you consider any Riddlers in this deck with all the pitch stuff?
No, I think the Kahira thing is actually pretty worthwhile, being able to pitch it to Solitude or
Oh,
like,
right. You wouldn't get Kahira, right. Yeah,
yeah,
no.
And then also, in a way, even though your deck is very good at locking your opponent out of the game and they can't literally ever win, you do need something that deal 20 damage to your opponent, so it's kind of nice to just have it in the companion zone.
Yeah, no, Kahira seems really good in this deck.
Yeah.
With the elementals and just the way that games I imagine play out and all that, so yeah. I mean, that's a strike in its favor, you're having a companion. That's pretty nice. So.
Yeah. Keep in mind, I mean, this list weirdly has a Snapcaster in sideboard, which would break the Kahira thing, which doesn't sound worth it to me. One of the cooler cards I see in Modern that works with Kahira is Beza.
Yeah.
So keep in mind, you can play a Beza in your sideboard, which doesn't sound like a horrible card against Boros Energy. I think, also, I'm used to this deck playing 1 Steam Vents and 1 Thundering Falls to fetch for Prismatic Ending, but also the list that got second at the PT had 2 Fire Magic in the sideboard. I think splashing for something like that sounds amazing to me. It's just, I don't think this deck is good against Boros, is my guess.
Is that where you want fire magic? I guess so. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
exactly. It's like if you decide Pyroclasm is better, that's fine, I guess too. But
One of those
yeah,
type of things. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, shit, man. Maybe I'll make this deck.
that's about. I felt
You
the way
kinda
I
like
sold
it
it
too.
would be less appealing to you because it's less of a control deck than living in my opinion.
Yeah, living end might be more fun. Honestly, I have to think about it. I don't know. I'm a blue white guy at heart. What can I say?
Let's move down that sowing Myco spawn, I guess. Sure,
Okay.
they can be. It's basically the same as Eldrazi Tron right now.
Sure. All right. Slightly below average decks. Depressing to play.
Yep. All right. So brood scale.
Yeah, brood scale. This
Um.
deck's still kicking around, huh?
Yeah. Honestly, I think it's kind of good right now if you want to play a Kozilek's command deck.
Okay.
I I think things I guess I would say are not that combo heavy, which is when I'm scared of playing brood scale. I think brood scale is like the combo deck that does a really good job of it's not very good at defending itself from what its opponent is doing besides, putting things in play. So I think it's kind of vulnerable to other combo decks. But it's kind of that combo deck that your opponent just like can't really interact with reasonably. Not that they can't stop the brood scale combo. They totally can do that. But the fact that it's also an Emrakul deck is what I mean. Like the game just can't go long.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like this deck. Don't know how good it is, obviously, because I don't play Modern, but
Yeah. I think it helps when Boros is popular because I think Walking Ballista is quite good against Boros, and you can combo Walking Ballista with Blade of the Blood Chief to do like a Goblin Sharpshooter thing where you ping down their creatures and it keeps getting every one toughness creature they have will die or whatever, stuff like that. And as other creatures die in combat, it'll get bigger. You can sack spawns to go to the Ballista, just stuff like that.
sure.
So that's a great selling point for it when Boros is so popular. You can play Writhing Chrysalis, which is pretty good against decks that just try to attack and block too if you wanted. This list we have on the screen has the Devourer of Destiny, many Emrakuls, and Ugin's Labyrinth. That's not an uncommon direction, but it's not one you have to play either. Sometimes, I think often this deck does not have Ugin's Labyrinth, and does not have, a bunch of 7-drops. It just plays like 2 Emrakul.
Okay. Yeah. So, not that different than the other Eldrazi decks, probably in the way.
Yeah, it's certainly the one. It's not that vulnerable to the land hate that people play, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is really popular right now, especially if you
Sure.
avoid the Ugin's Labyrinth thing. So that's what's kind of appealing to me. And, once again, I think Kozilek's Command is the best card in this deck. It also has Stirrings and Rumble. I really like that. I like that you can win fast. We could put it pretty high on the tier list.
Okay. Do you
honestly,
think it's above like Belcher and all that?
Yeah, I would probably put it like around the Prowess spot right now.
Okay. All right, that surprised me a little bit. Mostly because of just how unpopular it seems looking at Goldfish, but
it's split into multiple colors for what it's worth on Goldfish. So it's
that definitely matters.
Yeah. There's a Gruul one down there. That's only 1%, but still.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. So we got it
Yeah, and then lastly, that's fine.
Deck.
We got Birthing Ritual. This is a bit of unknown to me, but I wanted to talk about it because it started popping up after the last tier list video. It was really popular, and I feel like people have really iterated on it a lot.
Okay.
And there's a few different versions. So this is the deck with like all the 2-mana 1/1s that draw a card, like Ice-Fang Coatl and Coiling Oracle, usually a Fibblethip, sometimes even I've seen Pond Prophet. And it has Birthing Ritual, and it has Oculus, and it has a bunch of pitch spells, like Force Negation and Subtlety and Endurance. It's possible this deck, when I really think about it, kind of sounds like it could just be a worse Living End. Because it does a lot of the same things, and I kind of think that maybe trying to Birthing Ritual into Oculus, it's not only Oculus, obviously, you kind of chain value, right? You Birthing Ritual your 1/1s that draw a card, and the more 1/1s that draw a card when you miss. It's also often a Harbinger of the Seas deck. But I think the selling point, I guess, is Harbinger of the Seas. And I like this list you happen to pull up. So there's 2 directions I see. I see people play sometimes with Shardless Agent, that they don't play any cheap spells to hit besides, their 1/1s that draw a card and Birthing Ritual. But I like this list you have that has Quantum Riddler and Essence Flux. Obviously, Essence Flux is just like a 1-mana flicker thing. It's like Ephemerate without rebounds, basically. It's a blue card. You can flicker Riddler. You can flicker your 1/1s to draw a card. You can protect Oculus. There's a lot of cool things about it. I kind of like this version because I'll say I've played a little bit of this deck, and it looks really broken when it does its thing, and especially if you have a Birthing Ritual, basically. But the other half of its games kind of are just, I drew a bunch of 1/1s that drew a card and counter spells.
Yeah.
I guess Flare of Denial is the other kind of free counter spell this deck gets that I forgot to mention. So it has, an extra.
That's kind of nice.
Yeah, no, it's very disruptive. And when you get an Oculus into play fast, it feels awesome because it's so disruptive. It's really good at being disruptive. But you don't always get an Oculus into play fast. And I have not played with the Riddler Essence Flex stuff, but in my mind, that's like an acceptable second thing you can do that maybe works when you just draw a bunch of counter spells,
Yeah, I could see how that could beat someone, especially if counter spells are good against their deck.
And also you can turn Subtlety into Riddler sometimes off Birthing Ritual, so it's not completely outside the scope of change. I guess you can also warp Riddler and sometimes hit Riddler off Birthing Ritual, so you can cheat it. You can cheat it into play that way. It's like blinking it.
Okay.
This version you have up is splashing red. I do think you can splash something kind of in the realm of a sweeper. Black has been a popular one. Basically, I think, once again, this deck is kind of weak to Boros. When you think about what it's doing, it's a bunch of 1/1s and counter spells versus a deck that, in Ocelot Pride is a bunch of 1/1s in a single card. So that's kind of an issue for them. And they're green-blue. So green-blue is not going to get to play Great Removal. 2 Dismember is pretty normal, but it's hard to play a lot of Dismembers. So I've been seeing the black splashing for Fatal Push, but Plague Engineer is the one I really like because that's a creature, and this deck kind of wants creatures.
I forgot about that card. It's a pretty nice one.
Yeah, so that makes the black splash kind of appealing to me. I don't even care that much about Fatal Push. I think 1-for-1 removal might not really be what this deck is about.
What do you think about Fire Magic?
Yeah, that's a cool one. I guess my issue with Fire Magic is your deck
Meltdown.
has a bunch of 1/1s, so it's a little weird to me.
Sure. Yeah, Engineer seems maybe a little better.
Yeah. Honestly, I like the one Fibblethip when I see it in this deck. Kind of surprised it's not in this list, but when you hit it off the Birthing Ritual, you do draw 2 cards, and it's not that weird. And then, the splash is a little weird because I do think Harbinger of the Seas is kind of like a key part of this deck. Just, being kind of light on colors and good mana lets them get away with that. I've also, people I saw were playing Pawn Prophet over the Coiling Oracle. I guess that means they think it's just easier on the mana. Because you can literally always cast Pawn Prophet on turn 2, and maybe this deck draws 2 matching things. But I think if you're playing with Quantum Riddler, I'd probably say just play Coiling Oracle, because I think those times you put the extra land into play will probably be really valuable.
I mean, just in general, being able to do that is pretty good.
Really
Unless it was really hard to cast, but I don't know why it would be. You're just like fetch lands and shocks.
Yeah. Yeah, and then a bunch of Sink in the Supers normal in this deck as well, because it has all the pitch spells, and I think, once again, when you're doing stuff like getting to the board with Oculus, you're pretty happy to eventually.
I like me a Pawn Prophet, don't get me wrong, but...
Yeah, I remember I heard Edgar on a midweek metagame very long time ago talking about liking this deck, and he was saying you might just add Pawn Prophets to the deck on top of these 8 2-drops, and he had 8 2-drops and the first Fibblethip, and he thought this deck just might need more of that.
Right.
And Pawn Prophet was the next best one.
Sure. Okay. So, all that being said...
big mystery for me. It definitely seems like a cool deck. We could put it probably like in B. It could be low because I'm unknown about it, but it would make sense to play it to me. I guess maybe both Boros and Affinity might have some issues right now. And like I said, there's a chance if I really studied this deck and studied Living Ends. I mean, it's possible it goes the other way. These decks seem very similar to me. So I could definitely believe that if I played a bunch of these decks, I would come to the conclusion that one of them is just better than the other one in almost all circumstances, but...
Okay. Well, cool. This ended up working out pretty well. It's a nice bell curve. I wouldn't expect it to be perfect, but I hate it when I watch tier list things. And, well, first, there's 2 things I hate about tier list videos that people sometimes do. One is when they get ridiculous with the S's, where it's like A is mid tier, and then they've got like S and SSS and all that nonsense. And the other thing is when, I mean, most of the time your thing should be a bell curve, right? That's just like how it makes sense. I mean,
Yeah,
you
and
could make reasons that it wouldn't be, but
I should have said this at the start of the episode because maybe I've already pissed some people off with my D and F tier choices. But this is a list of modern decks that already are somewhat respectable in modern, ranked
right.
against each other.
These are like the best modern decks. Yeah.
Like there's another 20 modern decks that I could name or whatever, or
That would put all
name.
these up to B or A.
Yeah,
even.
exactly.
Yeah,
Like
that's fair.
it's
Like
this
someone
is
in our
already,
Discord sent a mono white deck, like a mono white prison control deck, and I have to imagine,
Yeah, I mean, I think really the only decks I'm slandering here are the ones I put in F. These
true.
are decks that I think see a lot of play that I kind of think are pretty bad. So
yeah,
the decks I put in D are decks that I could, for the most part, see myself bringing to a modern tournament. Maybe not the Blink deck, but the other three definitely.
especially if the metagame changed, like a
Yeah,
new set or something. You never know.
yeah. I mean, Ruby Storm won an RC in the last year, or things like that. I mean, I'm sure almost all of these decks have basically won a big event.
Yeah.
In the last year.
Welcome, one and all, to the Stock Up Podcast, your one-stop shop for stocking up on the information you need to qualify for the Pro Tour. My name is Alex Midas. I am joined each and every week by my co-host, Jacob Negro, where we talk about everything related to competitive Magic and how you can qualify for the Pro Tour. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do so is over on patreon.com/stockuppodcast. At the moment, we have one tier that's $1 a month, and for that, you get access to all of our exclusive content. For all of our patrons who have supported us thus far, on behalf of Jacob and I would like to thank you very much. And if you'd like to follow us also over on YouTube, that would be much appreciated. Of course, you can also listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thanks for listening, and please enjoy the rest of the podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, take a screenshot, folks. That's our tier list. Let us know if there are any hot takes. Let us know what you think in the Discord. And that'll do it for this one, folks. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, that too. All right. So I was watching some no ban list modern just a little bit. I was curious what was really good. And it kind of looked like Nadu was maybe the craziest thing. That and Mox Diamond, which that all checks out. Or Chromox, yeah.
Yep.
So that all checks out.
Yeah, I've played some no ban list modern local events a long time ago, but that was pre MH3.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like MH3 cards are pretty important. So
yeah,
it kind of completely changes everything I knew about that format beforehand, where I did think that also Mox Opal was banned when I played that, but the few times I'd played that format, I played a Simic deck with like Emry, Seed of Synod, 8 Moxen, Urza, Oko, the One Ring, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I will say from watching that, certainly I learned that like there are some really broken cards in Modern that need to stay banned, but I wanted to get your opinion on if there's any cards you thought that were on the ban list that could probably come off.
That's fun. I was just talking about that today.
Nice.
Yeah, so let's see. Let me pull up the ban list.
Yeah, I'll pull it up too for anyone who's still watching.
So I think there's two categories of cards that could get unbanned in Modern. So there's some cards I think should stay banned, obviously, but there are some that I think could be unbanned. Maybe 3 categories. Unbanned and maybe risky in that like they could be really good, but I'm not sure. There's unbanned and I think low risk, which means I just don't think they'll see a ton of play. But honestly, I think, Splinter Twin's an example of like unbanned and low risk, and they unbanned it. And, sometimes people have fun playing Splinter Twin, and I think that's cool. And then there's unbanned and almost no reward. Because I think people won't have that much fun playing with them, or the decks that will play them won't be good, but maybe they're unfun to play against. I guess I'll point at like KCI being an example where I don't think KCI would even be good.
But if you're
But
wrong, then
it
it's
no,
miserable.
well, I'm pretty confident they wouldn't be wrong. I just mean, you'd play against it every now and then when someone's playing for fun, and maybe they're having
Mm.
fun, but like their combo is not that entertaining to play against.
Yeah. Or
Obviously,
watch
getting
if that ever comes
losing
up.
is yeah.
That was the big thing I think with Clark Clan was like whenever you saw it on coverage, it was just like horrid. But
Yeah, and that card was printed or banned right before War of the Spark, followed by the first Modern Horizons. So I don't think it would have even survived that. I just think it's a little dated to play. There was no free spells when that deck was good. You cast KCI, it never got Force of Negation, it never got Force of Vigor. Your opponent couldn't play Karn, your opponent couldn't play Narset. That deck couldn't even beat Narset. Like it just drew. That's all it did. So like.
yeah, you're probably right.
Like I don't think it would really be a contender at all.
Yeah.
But like I don't think it can keep up with the free spells mostly. But let's see. As far as what could be unbanned, I think Birthing Pod might be in that category that is like kind of a nice sweet spot where I kind of just don't think it would be good. But I think people would play it a lot, and it might be a little good. Maybe some of these decks would play it. Maybe they wouldn't even play 4. Which is like, that would be kind of sweet, like the weird value kind of Birthing Pod where you just can't afford to put such a, I think the life cost is really high, especially with Boros being so popular.
Yeah, Birthing Pod is such a sweet card. I think they should totally unban it. I could see a world where it would compete, but I'd have a hard time believing it'd be too good.
Yeah, what's funny is people always they're like, oh, you could, if you play Birthing Pod and untap with, you can play Birds of Paradise in the Birthing Pod and to win the game, and I'm like, that's fine.
I know.
Like, I don't think
like
that's
nowadays that's so
bad.
disruptible.
You have to put a bunch of horrible cards in your deck to do it. Also, that you're going to draw. It's really disruptible, and it also costs like 10 life. So like you can't do that against Boros on the draw. Even if they didn't draw removal, you would just be at 10. Like it's
right.
like.
Yeah, so that'd be a cool one. I agree. Birthing Pod.
Yeah, now that Omnath hasn't really been a forefront in Modern in a while, I thought when Omnath was popular, I was like, I bet the Birthing Pod deck would just be playing Omnath, Birthing Pod, sack my Omnath, get Solitude, like it would be kind of boring. Right. But now Omnath and Solitude aren't even that good. I mean, but I still kind of think that might be the direction you go because the Omnath life gain might be pretty valuable, and because you're a toolboxy deck, playing those 4 colors might also be valuable.
I mean, that sounds like a sweet deck to me.
Yeah, also, like the Omnath Fetch, Birthing Pod lines sound pretty fun.
What do you think about Uro? Do you think he's any better than Flage?
I think that's on the category where I'd prefer Flage to get banned more, like, regardless of their power level. They're not very fun to
also
play against.
ban Flage, yeah.
Yeah. And I think Uro would be really played in Modern, and even if it's not absolutely broken, even if it's just about as good as Flage, I don't think that would be very fun.
Yeah, that's fair. Goes in the kind of decks that I would like to see more of a Modern. That's kind of the only thing, but it does sort of homogenize those decks a lot.
Yeah, I think Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise could totally be legal.
Yeah, that's probably right. Even Treasure Cruise, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see it. I mean, I would like them to unban some stuff that even seem a little risky just for fun,
Yeah, this
Modern's
one
so
probably
big at this
wouldn't get
point. It could definitely
unbanned,
handle
but
it.
there's one we talked about a lot today in this conversation, which was Fury. Which Fury would see a ton of play, to be clear. But like, I don't know. The quote I liked today, which was actually from CFT, the Temur Harmonizer creator, they said, "No one has ever complained in the game of Modern that they weren't able to trade their resources fast enough to stay in the game." Like,
yeah. Do you think overall the pitch elementals have been a good change for the format? Like improved it?
I do think that Fury does punish some small creature decks, but I don't know. Now we have Boros at the top of the meta, so maybe it's right to have something to punish a small creature deck,
Yeah, I mean, Boros would play Fury, right? But
kind of, yeah. I mean, it's still, that's another thing they have to fit in, but yeah, they probably would play it.
Mm-hmm.
At least in their sideboard.
I bet we could have Deathrite Shaman.
That one I'm pretty confident would see a lot of play at the very least. It definitely wouldn't be bad.
You think?
Yeah, I think it would see a ton of play. I think, I mean, it still sees play in Vintage, I think, when people build decks with those colors.
Okay.
I just think
I could
it's
see it. I would think
people
it'd
used to
be
complain that it was a 1/2 when it was out and popular and legal and modern, and how dumb it is that it's a 1/2, and that might be why it still would be a top card in the current modern.
can't get
is that
Rend or Orcish Bowmasters
you
or
could
whatever.
play it in block Ocelot Pride too, stuff like that. Like it,
We could use some things to block that guy. That's fine.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think there definitely are a lot of 1-drops of similar power level, but I do think Deathrite Shaman would stand up and be among them, like Tamiyo and Ragavan.
Mm-hmm. It at least would add like a give
Color
green
diversity.
a good 1-drop. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you'd get into the legacy problem that people would splash the green.
Maybe. Or the black, obviously.
People would just be playing Psychic Frog and Deathrite Shaman, and
Sounds like a good time.
yeah.
What else is on here? Field of the Dead. That one can come off for sure, right?
Yeah, sure. I would see play, but I mean, it's boring. That one's kind of boring.
Would it see play?
I think Amulet, yeah.
Yeah. All right, fine.
One I think would not be that good, which is just funny, but I don't think they should unban it because it's low upside, is Hogak.
Wow.
I kind of think if you played like the, Hogak when it was broken deck against Boros Energy, that Boros Energy would come out on top a lot. And that's just purely like a how good are they at playing to the board and doing their thing type of stuff.
Okay.
I also think, that card existed when Solitude didn't exist, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Exiling it was a lot more annoying.
Right.
I think, if it was good, it would be warping and it would be handleable. But that's not what you want either.
No, it's not.
But I do think like people could be like, oh, Hogak's a top deck. I can play a deck that I'm not very scared of Hogak. And they would be right,
Yeah. People would play Oko probably if they unbanned Oko.
Yeah, Oko would not be... I think Oko is actually not as good as it was by a lot. I think it's a card that would see play. It probably would be not completely dominant like it was. But Oko's not very fun. Elking all your stuff. Play pattern sucked. Also, as someone that played a Grand Prix and a Pro Tour with Oko in multiple formats, it's kind of slow. It's a really hard card to play with because deciding whether you're going to make a food or what permanent in play you're going to elk each turn is like kind of a hard decision every turn.
Whenever I play Vintage Cube, this is one of my favorite cards just because I feel like the gameplay is actually kind of fun.
I think it's really fun to play with. I just think it's slow.
Okay.
Like I think it's a hard decision every turn usually.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it. I think it would be played in a couple decks, but I don't think.
Yeah, no, I think it would be a. Yeah, I agree. I think it would be a card you'd see often in Modern, but it wouldn't be one that would feel that broken. But it is still really high loyalty and kind of good at taking over the game when it does work.
It might still have a lot of negativity around it. To be fair, too.
I think what would happen is the reason it's maybe not as good is that the board presence is a lot more powerful, faster in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem is you'd get in the spots where you play it and it like doesn't work. It would just instantly die, which is also what happens in Vintage Cube sometimes I've found. But that's still not very fun because it's kind of either like an F or an A+ a lot of the time, I think, is what would happen.
Yeah. Okay. Guess that's all the interesting stuff, to be honest, looking at this. Umezawa's Jute, I can't imagine that needs to be on the list.
Yeah, that card's not good, but it's not fun. So that's, you think it's fun?
I think it's like nostalgic and cool.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I kind of think maybe.
I kind of think it sees zero play.
Some Stoneforge Boros. I don't know. You don't have to go for it. What if they played like 2 Stoneforges and a Jite in their flex spots?
Maybe. And then what? The idea is that it's crazy in the creature matchups?
Yeah. And then they could sideboard 2 more Stoneforges and another equipment or something.
This card I know is in Historic, and it sees like 0 play.
Yeah, that one was funny. I don't know if we talked about that, but they pre-banned it in Historic with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh.
But it has been it was legal in Historic the entire time.
Funny.
It saw no play, but somebody in charge of the ban list was like, better pre-ban this one. And it's just
ban in Modern.
There, legal.
I mean, I think Historic's probably a more powerful format than Modern.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Historic. No, not historic. I mean, timeless is, but I don't think historic's more
Timeless
powerful.
definitely is. You don't think historic? Well, it doesn't say
No.
any play historic. That might be a
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think
Okay.
that's fair. I probably just see no play. There's better tools for anti-creature stuff.
Up the beanstalk.
That one I think could stay banned. It's pretty
I
good.
hate that one.
That it's banned or hate that it exists.
That it exists.
Yeah. I don't know. Did you know what happened in Modern when it came out that got it banned?
No, not really. Well, I just had
So,
you just play a bunch of Evoke Elementals, right?
yeah, but people played their deck. It looked like Living End. Like their deck was
Oh.
Shardless Agent. Obviously, the upside is they could sideboard real cards if they wanted. Not counter
Yeah.
spells, but like you could just play cards that you wanted to hit against with Shardless Agent. But their main deck was only it was like Leyline Binding, Solitude Fury,
Leyline Binding.
Omnath. And
Do
then
people not play Leyline Binding
Falsification.
anymore? Am I missing something?
Just the Domain Zoo deck. That's it.
At this point? Okay. I know Control
I-
decks used to play it, but
Yeah, so I mean, I think what happened is the Surveillance printed, and playing Triomes became a much bigger cost because you're missing out on playing Surveillance, and then
Yeah,
the
that makes
Triomes are pretty
sense.
important.
and then I think most of the companions should stay banned too, for what it's worth.
Yeah, they're not fun. I mean, Gigantha's an example of a card that I don't think was like that broken, but it was a little broken and boring.
Yeah, it's just not very fun when
Yeah,
they're
it's
really
not
ubiquitous, and they ruin deck building in a way because you're always building towards them. Even Kahira like kind of does that. Obviously, that one's
Yeah.
power level is not very high, so it's fine. But
You were talking about no ban list Modern too. One of the decks I've seen that's pretty popular is playing with Glaring Fleshraker and Sensei's top.
Mm.
The joke is if you get two tops, then you win with Glaring
Yeah.
Fleshraker.
you trying to
but
bring
that-
top back?
No, that one's pretty horrible. That one was never around in Modern at all, I think, right? Just pre-banned, and
I think so.
that's good. Yeah, definitely.
Finally got back in
there's
Legacy
a-
at some point.
Watching some of the games, I've seen a very funny interaction that is only, I think, legal in no ban list Modern. I mean, I guess it's legal in Vintage or Commander or whatever, but it's where sometimes Ragavan hints their opponent's Sensei's Dividing Top, which then means
Oh,
you can tap the top to draw a card and put it on top of your opponent's deck.
and then hit him
which would
again.
yeah, and then but you just wait to do that till your Ragavan triggers on the stack or something again. You know, like you can
Yeah.
just keep drawing, paying 1 mana to draw a card when you hit them with Ragavan, basically. Plus, you can
Yeah,
filter your
it's
own
kinda
deck below
cute.
it too.
Okay. All right. One more thing. What about Arkham's Astrolabe?
That one would actually be really good. So I think
Yeah, it would.
I think
be.
it would. That's just like such a universal, like there's nothing too broken about that card, but it's also really easy to play and would still be really easy to play, and you would flicker it with Felia for sure and stuff like that.
Yeah, in a way, you could argue it's kind of inherently broken because it's just so low cost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like obviously it's not winning the game or whatever, but it's just like a card that's correct to play in many decks and really good. And yeah, I mean, I think that's mostly it. Yeah, I don't know. Birthing Pod. Oh, Glimpse of Nature. That's one where like maybe the combo turn is too long when they do combo, but I don't think it would be very good. So maybe it's 2 reasons. Even though I think maybe you shouldn't unban it because it's like I just don't think it'll be good anyways. There's no way. I could believe maybe there is a playable deck, but I think there's no way that it could be like a top of the meta playable deck because of Orcish Bowmasters, which is just like inherently gonna be good against the small creature
Totally
deck and
ruin
punish you.
The elf, yeah, whatever
Yeah.
they're gonna do with it,
I
probably.
mean, that's what
elf.
happened in Legacy, I think. I mean, Orcish Bowmaster just sees a ton of play in Legacy because it's just good against Brainstorm and Ponder and stuff anyways, but I think the Glimpse decks are like completely dead.
Okay, you reminded me of an argument that they made on MTG Goldfish podcast at some point when I was listening, where they said some cards they should just leave banned because if they like bring back your hero and then it's just totally unplayable, it's a real feel bad. So like when they brought back Jace the Mind Sculptor, and it was just like not very good. It broke. I can't remember the host, but it like broke his spirit because he loved it so much, and now he knows it's just terrible.
But that's not even what happened. Jason
That's
the
not what
Mind
happened with
Sculptor
Jace.
saw a lot of
It saw
play,
some play.
and it was pretty good until like the Rise and stuff came around. Even not like,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know. It was like
It was okay.
kind of as good as you think it should have been, because it was like
Yeah.
it was really strong in standard, but obviously some things have happened. But also modern's way more powerful than standard, and it seemed like a card that was still good enough to see play in the control deck only alongside Terminus is like that's kind of fair.
Mm-hmm. But like maybe if that happened to like Glimpse of Nature, it just saw no play, that makes somebody sad. I don't know.
Yeah,
Just a thought.
Yeah, I'm reminded of. I actually had a sweet Jace the Mind Sculptor deck at one point in Modern, right before the Horizon stuff came out. It was a teamer. I guess it was with Horizon stuff. It was before Modern Horizons 2. Then it was teamer with Ren and 6, and this was the time when the best
Jace
decks
plus Ren at 6 is nice.
Yeah, this was the time when the best decks were like Prowess and Heliod combo. And I had this idea for a deck where I wanted to get a lot of value out of Ren and 6 because it was actually not really seeing play in Modern, and I thought it was just super broken. Maybe even the best card in Modern at the time. So it's like shelling out, I guess, what you'd normally expect from a team or control deck, except I put 4 Lonely Sandbar in my deck instead of where you might see like 4 Serum Visions. So the joke being that I could just assemble that with Ren and 6 and get an extra card every turn. And I played like 3 Jace the Mind Sculptor, so I could convert my lands into Brainstorms and get card advantage. And the other nice part about playing Jace is that one of the most played decks was an Infinite Life combo deck. So it's just kind of nice to like, obviously I don't want to like let them just untap with a big board because it's bad for me as a control deck, but maybe I tap out on their end step and they resolve Collected Company and they gain Infinite Life, and it's like, that's fine.
Still win. Yeah. Jace Mind Sculptor, sweet card. Who knew?